Good morning, everyone. It's 6 o'clock. Coming up, the Prime Minister faces the biggest diplomatic test of his premiership.
We'll look at the trump cards that Sir Keir Starmer has at his disposal ahead of the White House meeting.
It's Thursday, the 27th of February. Coming your way this morning, Sir Keir Starmer arrives in Washington for talks with President Trump, repeating calls for a US security guarantee on Ukraine. Hundreds of Palestinian prisoners are freed after Hamas releases the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages. Phase 1 of the ceasefire deal is done, but phase 2, well, it hangs in the balance.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Go, Falcon, go.
Blast off this morning for the deep space mission looking to the stars to mine precious resources. And in sport, England's women beat world champions Spain 1-0 at Wembley. Hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks for your company here on Sky News Breakfast. So the Prime Minister has landed in Washington, D.C. This is ahead of the biggest diplomatic test of his premiership so far, a meeting with Donald Trump. In recent weeks, the US president has shocked allies with his comments on NATO, Europe's security, and of course the war in Ukraine. Sir Keir Starmer's challenge will be to bring Mr. Trump on side to help ensure a secure future for Ukraine, and a warning that this report from our US correspondent, James Matthews, well, it contains flash photography.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
As business trips go, it's big. Peace in Ukraine will be the awkward negotiation between Prime Minister and President. At an embassy gathering last night, Sir Keir Starmer talked special relationship and special measures to meet Donald Trump's demands on defence.
This week, we've shown our willingness to defend with the biggest sustained increase in our defence spending since the Cold War.
After Monday's French bromance, this is the British strand of a European effort. At the White House, it will be a meeting of two men who don't necessarily share one view. Sir Keir Starmer comes here seeking a US backstop, American security guaranteeing a peace agreement in Ukraine. Donald Trump didn't necessarily share the vision in a cabinet meeting yesterday.
I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that.
The UK's Prime Minister participated in a roundtable discussion with business leaders last night. This was an event to introduce the UK's new ambassador, old Labour hand Peter Mandelson. For his speech last night, read Starmer's sentiments today.
We are living through a very, very significant moment for our alliance between our two countries, and indeed for all the freedom-loving democracies in the world. I wouldn't say that we are being encircled by our adversaries. We're certainly not, but they're doing a little bit of ganging up.
Donald Trump has enjoyed the company of UK Prime Ministers in the past. He gave us the hand-holding with Theresa May and has spoken of his fondness for Starmer. A personal connection has endured through the years in this special relationship. Today will test its politics. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer's visit dominates the front pages this morning, so let's take a look for you. The Times says the PM will tell Donald Trump that the USA is needed to hold back Putin. The Telegraph describes the upcoming meeting as a confrontation, saying the PM will tell the US president that Russia will invade Ukraine again unless America provides protection. There's also a similar headline in The Guardian, which reports that Keir Starmer will stress the threat of another Russian invasion to Donald Trump. And, well, the Mirror puts it a little more starkly. He'll strike again, they say. And then the Eye reports the Prime Minister will tell the President that if he backs Europe on Ukraine, one of his rewards will be getting to meet the King. Wow. Mari's here to discuss all of this, there is so much to talk about. You know, you go to bed and you think the story is one thing. You wake up, you open social media, it's another. But one
That's
thing
what we're here for.
Exactly. One thing we do know is that Keir Starmer is stateside. What does he have to do to win over Donald Trump?
It's a really, really delicate moment for Keir Starmer, arguably the most consequential moment of his premiership so far. Donald Trump is notoriously not necessarily easy to please. It doesn't mean it's not possible, but Keir Starmer needs to find a way to not undermine Donald Trump and some of his rhetoric and what we're hearing from Trump, but also simultaneously show enough strength that he can push back and show that he is a strong leader. Trump is always described as, you know, he likes winners. He likes kind of, you know, a good adversary, as it were.
If they show weakness, then he's on the back foot.
Exactly. So you do need to come in and you need to show strength. And we know that, for instance, Donald Trump is going to respect Keir Starmer's mandate. He likes people, like I say, he likes winners. And they have both won elections within a short space of time of each other. And so they are both in a similar position, even though they might be ideologically opposed in terms of one on the left and one on the right. In terms of the agenda for the Prime Minister today in those meetings at the White House, so it's really all about those security guarantees from the US. We heard in that package from James Matthews, Donald Trump's comments basically saying he doesn't really want to give too many security guarantees away. So I think that will be the sticking point in this meeting, is what will be the extent of those US security guarantees, because the PM keeps talking about that. That's the point that he keeps hammering home, isn't it, every time we hear from him. The government insists that the focus today is growth, prosperity and security. So not just Ukraine, but they want to talk trade, they want to talk AI and tech and ways that the US and the UK can collaborate. And that's a really big focus for them. Now, the difficulty is, how are we going to avoid those tariffs? Yesterday, Donald Trump was talking about 25% tariffs on the European Union. He was really quite bad-mouthing the European Union in terms of why it was created. He said it was there to kind of make life difficult for the US. I'll say that in a polite way. It's not exactly what he said. And so the other thing will be, how are we going to find ways to have a good trading relationship with the US? How are we going to find ways to avoid those tariffs? Can we manage to get away from them, or will we get caught up in those tariffs? And then another interesting side note will be whether the Chagos deal is discussed. David Lammy, Foreign Secretary, yesterday was talking to journalists about this, and he essentially admitted that the US has a veto on the Chagos deal, something that is true but is not really normally said so explicitly. It's normally implicitly kind of suggested, as it were. And so when it comes to, as you saw that headline, Trump cards for Keir Starmer, what are his Trump cards? Really, there are three. Okay. One is Brexit. So the fact that we are not part of the EU, we were just talking about EU tariffs, could that work to our advantage? Could that mean that we are not necessarily burnt with the same flame, as it were? Second, that big defence spending pledge. Yes. Now, he's done that just before the meeting to show Donald Trump that the UK is serious about defence and ready to lead the way for Europe. Could that sweeten that meeting? And then third, a state visit with the King. We know that Donald Trump loves the royal family, and could that potentially be up in Scotland? In Balmoral, we know that Donald Trump loves Scotland. His mother was Scottish. So those are the things at play. That is what is at stake. The question will really be, can Keir Starmer be a good enough international leader, strike the perfect balance with Donald Trump and come home with some level of a successful, successful meetings, successful decisions potentially ahead of then that big summit on the weekend here in the UK, where we're having European leaders and Zelensky coming over as well. So it's a huge, huge moment for British politics.
Okay, wow, so much to get into later today. Mari, thank you so much for that. And just worth a mention, actually, at 7:15, Wilfred Frost will speak to the Science Secretary, that's Peter Carl. And later in the programme, he'll also be joined by the Shadow Paymaster General, that's Richard Holden. So do stay with Sky News. We've got you covered this morning. But let's take a quick look at this morning's other top stories for you. Hamas has handed the bodies of the last 4 Israeli hostages that were included in the first phase of the ceasefire deal to the Red Cross. The remains of the 4 men were exchanged for the release of more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. This was late last night. And of course, DNA testing is being carried out by Israeli authorities to confirm their identities. The war in Ukraine won't be on the agenda when the US and Russian diplomats meet in Turkey later today. Instead, officials will discuss the operation of their embassies in Washington and Moscow. But according to the Kremlin, the dialogue could help pave the way for peace talks eventually. Dentists have warned that the thousands of extra appointments promised by the government will only cover a third of people who need urgent care. The British Dental Association says 1.5 million people could be left untreated despite the rollout of an additional 700,000 appointments from April. American actress Michelle Trachtenberg has died at the age of 39. The star, who's best known for her role as Dawn Summers in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was found dead at her home in New York City yesterday morning. Police not treating her death as suspicious. Now to a high-risk mission to scout for precious metals and minerals, but not deep underground, up in space. But it's not going to be an easy mission, though. It'll take 300 days to catch up with the asteroid in question, which is 1 million miles from Earth. Thomas Moore has been investigating whether the mission will be worth it.
3, 2, 1, mission, and liftoff. Go, Falcon, go into ignition.
Odin thundered into the Florida sky, riding in a SpaceX rocket, heading out into the solar system, the first private spacecraft to venture so far. Its mission is to rendezvous with an asteroid and scout out its potential for mining. Asteroid 2022 OB5 is thought to be rich in platinum and similar metals, widely used in electronics and other critical technology. They're so valuable, the startup Astroforge says it's worth going the distance.
The problem is with Earth is that all of the good ore sources of platinum group metal we've mined, and everything we're looking at now is thousands of meters under the Earth. It's actually very, very difficult to go mine on Earth. We know this exists in space. We know it's readily available. Our mission is just, instead of going down, we want to go up.
Odin should catch up with the asteroid 1 million miles from Earth, then take detailed pictures. If they look promising, another spacecraft will follow, this time landing on the surface to confirm the company has struck platinum.
The little twinkles in there, those are little bits of metal.
At the Natural History Museum in London, there are meteorites that look like lumps of metal. Mining in deep space could make sense.
Metallic asteroids are much rarer than the stony ones, but they are there. They make up quite a substantial part of our meteorite collection here at the Natural History Museum, so we know that they're out there in space, and we know that they're incredibly rich in elements like platinum, but also cobalt and nickel. They're, just a fantastic resource for many metals.
The same SpaceX rocket is also carrying a robotic moonlander called Athena that will drill into the lunar surface looking for water. As the cost of reaching space has plummeted, mining far from Earth has become economically viable, and our celestial neighbours are seen as a potential resource. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Matthew's here on set now because we're going to talk about the UK's largest police force. They've basically published a new charter, and this is all about stop and search, Matthew.
Indeed,
what are the
it is.
Details?
Well, look, charter, this is the Metropolitan Police, of course. The charter sounds very grand. Essentially what this is it's the first formal set of rules and commitments to how stop and search is going to be carried out, agreed in conjunction with Londoners and published in this way. And it actually came out of something called the Casey Review, which you might remember was a very damning review into the Met 2023 after the murder of Sarah Everard, really attacked the sort of culture and leadership of the Metropolitan Police. And one of the things it recommended was the creation of this charter. So what the Met has done is says it's consulted over the last year and a half with 8,500 Londoners of all ethnicities, ages and backgrounds, and the result of it is this charter. So what's in it? Well, various things. It commits to improved training for officers in the use of stop and search. There are going to be more robust supervision processes, so there are going to be regular and random reviews of how stop and search is actually being carried out. And also a much more robust and better complaints procedure for complaints around stop and search, and lots of other things like that. So it's quite a detailed document. And look, fundamentally, stop and search is a deeply controversial policy. The Metropolitan Police remains of the view that it works. They think it gets weapons, drugs off the streets. In fact, they say 3,500 weapons off the streets last year alone. But it's obviously very, very controversial. Now, the Met, in this release, has said that it has polling which suggests 68% of Londoners support stop and search. But it also recognises in the small print that that varies widely on who you ask. And we know that particularly black, but other ethnic minority communities in London very much do not like the policy. They think it sows distrust. And there's some quite good evidence on this as well. I mean, there's a review a couple of years ago into the use of stop and search in the West Midlands rather than London.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it found that there was a disproportionate targeting, or maybe targeting is the wrong word, but ethnic minorities appear disproportionately in stop and search data. But crucially, relative to two things: their representation in the population, but then also relative to their representation in crime statistics. So one of the things you often hear, and I've heard from police officers as well, you know, we just police the crime, and if the crime is overrepresented in ethnic minorities, well, so we'll stop and search. But actually, this study found that ethnic minorities were overrepresented in the statistics relative to their representation in the crime statistics, and I thought that was fascinating. And so, look, it will continue to be a controversial policy, but I think the Met is keen to persist with it, and they hope that this new charter will allow them to do that and bring London's population on side.
OK, really interesting. Matthew, as always, thank you so much. We'll move on now, because Alex Salmond was one of the driving forces behind the political drive for Scottish independence. Following his death last October, and leaves a vacuum at the top of the party. He formed to keep that fight alive, Alba. And our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis talked exclusively to both candidates, and he sent us this report.
You look really well.
Yeah, well, same with you. We haven't changed a bit. You're looking much older.
He was the colourful, complicated face of Scottish independence. The leader of the Alba party, a vehicle for Alex Salmond amid his bitter SNP split. But his death leaves these two, Ash Regan or Kenny McCaskill, vying to replace him in a contest that's been engulfed in infighting.
I think we've got a real chance.
Visiting a window factory, this Salmond ally is accusing McCaskill of bullying amid claims he disobeyed orders.
I think Kenny's going to look back in the near future and regret some of the actions of the previous months. You know, Alex Salmond used to always tell me that in a political party, rational people need to bump along with each other. Sadly, we've not seen people bumping along with each other. So either that means they're not being acting rational, or it means they're not in a position that they're fit to lead a political party.
Are you a bully?
No. Mr McElhenny is causing a great deal of upset and distress to his widow, to his family. I think he should cease and desist at the time of Alex's death. I'm required to speak to him on behalf of the family. He has been, suspended. He has since been dismissed on gross misconduct, but the NEC has terminated his employment.
This is really messy, isn't it? It's really, really messy.
It is certainly something we would rather not have had, but the position, the case for independence remains clear.
The other contender, an SNP defector, seems to be distancing herself from Alex Salmond.
Alba was struggling to cut through, you're absolutely right, which is why I'm saying we absolutely cannot continue the way we were. It has allowed the party to drift leaderless, and it is descending into a little bit of chaos right now.
And would Alba work with Nigel Farage?
If you're asking me, would I ever go into a coalition with the Reform Party in a formal basis? Absolutely not. But if you're asking me, would Alba be a constructive political force in the Parliament working for the things that are important for the people of Scotland? Absolutely.
And that means working with Reform on a case-by-case basis, potentially?
I would work with any party on a case-by-case basis if I felt it was the right thing for the people of Scotland.
There we go.
The question is, with bitter divisions being exposed and very few votes being cast overall for Alba when Alex Salmond was here, is it all but over for his brainchild? Conor Gillis, Sky News, Edinburgh.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show, a lifetime of adventure. We meet the first explorer to reach the world's 3 poles. And then at 2:45, we'll take a closer look at today's papers in our news review, of course, with Maury.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal.
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
Had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight?
Off the scale. I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, it's safe to say my next guest knows a thing or two about adventure. Norwegian explorer Erling Kagge was the first person in history, essentially, to reach both the North and South Poles and the summits of Everest. And he's decided to share his fascination with all of that in a new book. It's so great to have you with us.
Thank
Erling.
you. Good morning.
Where do we start? What made you want to go on this huge adventure?
I think, first of all, we're all born explorers.
Really?
If you look at kids, being born, the first thing they do is to stretch out the arms and the legs and scream for more space and air. And after a year, you walk out to the house and start to wonder what's between yourself and the horizon. So I think we all have this spirit. But for me, it's also wanting to be in nature. It's a want for making my life more difficult than it has to be, which I think is important if you're Norwegian, or also for many British people, that you should actively make your life a little bit more difficult.
And talk to me about some of the challenges then you faced on this adventure.
It's first of all to get up in the morning at the right time every day. It's difficult back home, but when it's minus 50 centigrade to minus 60 Fahrenheit, as it is towards the North Pole, it's even tougher. So you freeze, you're starving, you're hungry, and you're exhausted. But the good thing is to feel warm after having been cold, to feel full after having been starving, and have a rest or sleep when you're exhausted. That's kind of the origins of gratefulness.
Oh, wow.
And to feel gratefulness on this kind of basic level is a beautiful feeling, although it's a very painful, thing to do in life, to walk to the North Pole.
And one of the other challenges, and actually it may not have been a challenge, was that you did this alone.
I did the South Pole by myself. I want to be the first alone to the South Pole. But to the North Pole, I went with my friend Børge Aasland, so we were two.
But there's something quite interesting, I think, about being in nature, like you say, but being in this extreme environment, just you. What did you learn from that?
You learn about silence.
Yes.
Because, of course, in nature, it's quite often silent or almost silent. And then it's easier to find your own inner silence, this silence which is there all the time for you and me and everyone else. But this inner silence is about who you are. And that's what I want to try to write about in the book. While noise is about everyone else. It's about forgetting who you are. It's about running away from yourself. So in nature, you find silence. And you find many other things too. I think that's the biggest mistake we're doing today, is to separate ourselves from nature.
And why did you decide to write the book then?
I wanted to write the book because this history of the North Pole, from prehistoric times all the way until today, has not been told before by anyone who has walked to the North Pole. So it kind of came from my heart.
And then I suppose there's questions around the fact that there is so much noise. You know, we work in this news environment, in this studio, where breaking news is happening all the time. But what you were able to do in this adventure was to silence all of that and gain power from it too.
Yes, I even wrote a book about silence in the age of noise, because after all these expeditions, I got 3 daughters, and then my life was all about noise.
Yeah.
And my daughter said to me, silence is nothing. And this also said, like philosophers say, that nothing comes from nothing. But of course, silence is something. And that's something you learn in nature.
Incredible. What would be your advice to people watching at home, you know, heading out to work, trying to feed the kids breakfast and just keeping up with that hamster wheel of life, I suppose?
You know, we're all different, but I think, you know, this kind of short moments of silence, walk through the park, instead of taking the metro all the way to your office, maybe walk the last 3 stations. You always have this kind of short moments where you can find some inner silence. But of course, if you live in London, it's far away to nature, but you still have beautiful parks. And I think most people are underestimating their own possibilities in life to experience something a little bit, you know, beyond the normal.
Your advice to people with social media then, switch it off, have a break?
Yeah, and you know, somehow find their own North Poles in life. But of course, you know, in periods of life, you are too busy. But then, you know, it calms down again. And as I said, I think, you know, people have more possibilities in terms of being in nature, in terms of discovering this silence within, than they usually imagine.
And then just briefly, do you have any other challenges coming up? Or are you taking a rest from exploring?
You know, to writing the book for me was a huge challenge, different challenge, but that's kind of the journey within into my own mind, which in one way is the longest journey.
Of course.
But as I said, we were all born explorers, so I will keep on going.
Oh, you're a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for coming, Erling. Great to have you on the show. I feel so peaceful and calm under your presence. Thank you. We're going to head for a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be chatting about tariffs, job cuts and a deal with Ukraine. We'll take a look at Donald Trump's first cabinet meeting in the White House. And of course, we'll have the sport covered for you. Liverpool take another step towards the Premier League title with victory, this time over Newcastle.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal.
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
Had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we're going to take a look at the papers for you in our news review with Mari. We'll bring you the sport. But first, just a quick reminder of our top stories this morning. So Keir Starmer will meet Donald Trump in Washington today. This is for talks on the future of Ukraine. And it, of course, will be the first time the two leaders speak in person since the US president's inauguration last month. The Prime Minister has called on the US to provide a security guarantee for Ukraine. But Donald Trump says that responsibility lies with Europe. Hamas has handed the bodies of the last 4 Israeli hostages that were included in the first phase of the ceasefire deal to the Red Cross. The remains of the 4 men were exchanged for the release of more than 600 Palestinian prisoners late last night. DNA testing is being carried out by Israeli authorities to confirm their identities. The Metropolitan Police has unveiled a new charter for stop and search powers. The Met has pledged to improve training so that its officers have a better understanding of the communities they serve. There will also be regular and random reviews of how the scheme is operating. Dentists have warned that the thousands of extra appointments promised by the government will only cover a third of people who need urgent care. British Dental Association says 1.5 million people could be left untreated despite the rollout of an additional 700,000 appointments from April.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff. Go Falcon, go.
And a tiny probe has made its way into space to try and mine an asteroid for platinum. If successful, scientists say the mission could allow us to maintain our way of life without destroying the planet. Incredible. Well, let's return to Washington, where Donald Trump has held his first cabinet meeting since the inauguration of Donald Trump. The US president once again hit out at the EU and threatened to impose 25% worth of tariffs very soon. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports from the White House.
The headline before the meeting began was that Elon Musk would be there.
Mr. Musk, what's your message to federal employees who you fired?
Not a cabinet member, but in every way, the world's richest man and unelected is such a central part of this presidency. And so in the end, of course, he'd be there. Inside, the critics' lines wrote themselves. He really was the shadowy figure in the corner. The black MAGA hat, his nod to his president's movement.
Thank you, God, for President Trump, Father, for appointing us.
For the first 90 minutes, it was free-flowing. The intention was accessibility, or at least the illusion of that. Because this White House is now seeking to control who can report in here. And as always, much of what the president said just wasn't true.
They spent $350 billion and Europe spent $100 billion. Now, does anybody really think that's fair?
He repeated the claim that America had paid more than Europe to Ukraine and that Europe's funding is a loan.
The money they spent, they get back. But the money we spent, we don't get back.
But it was how he framed things that was so striking. On the EU.
The European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest.
On NATO.
NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started.
His answer here was telling.
Is it also your policy that as long as you're president, China will never take Taiwan by force?
I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position.
And if the French president thought he'd got somewhere on Monday over the tariff issue, well, maybe not.
We have made a decision. We'll be announcing it very soon, and it'll be 25%, generally speaking, and that'll be on cars and all other things.
The optics of all this were about control and about showing a leader and subordinates in a country built on 3 equal branches of power behind a rule of law.
Is it your view of your authority that you have the power to call up any one of or all of the people seated at this table and issue orders that they're bound to follow?
Oh, yeah, they'll follow the orders, yes, they will.
No exceptions?
No exception. Well, let's see, let me think. Oh, yeah. She'll have an exception. Of course, no exceptions.
With that cabinet room spectacle, Keir Starmer couldn't have asked for a clearer indication of what he faces here, of the type of government America now has, the type of leader Donald Trump now is. American power and its global clout consolidated in one man and his way. The jeopardy over the day ahead will be the news conference. Trump and Starmer free-flowing. Mark Stone, Sky News at the White House.
Well, elsewhere, Ukraine has agreed terms with the United States on a crucial minerals deal. A Ukrainian government source has told Sky News Volodymyr Zelensky is due to arrive in Washington on Friday to sign the deal. Here's our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, on why the deal is so important to the new Trump administration.
So why is there all this focus on rare earths, critical minerals? In part, it's because Donald Trump wants to generate a little bit of money in terms of, in return for all of that aid that's been given by the US. But in part, it's because Ukraine has been providing lots of information about potentially exciting minerals they've got under the ground. This is a mineral map of the country. And if we just zoom in here, in particular, there's one place, a deposit here, it's a former Soviet deposit going back to the 1970s, where they say there's a lot of rare earth. Now, rare earths are really important. They're in a suite of elements in the periodic table. They're used in magnets, they're used in military applications, so they matter a lot. And right now, the reason this really matters for the US, right now, most rare earth mining is dominated by China. So that's China in terms of the mining, dominating the global supply. When you think about refining those rare earths, so actually getting the rare earth out of the ground is pretty easy. Turning it into something you can use in a magnet or whatever it might be, that's really hard, and China also dominates that 90% of rare earth production. So you can see the attraction here. If the US feels they can get those rare earths in the Ukraine, well, maybe that might solve this. But here's the issue. When you look at how much in the way of rare earths there might be in Ukraine, it doesn't even scratch the surface. This is showing you global reserves of rare earths from China through to Brazil, India, Russia, Vietnam, and the US. The US actually has quite a bit of rare earths in the ground, but there's no Ukraine anywhere there, and that's partly because it doesn't really have much, even if you take into account that's resource in the ground, bearing in mind the idea that you can actually get it out of the ground economically. So maybe it's not rare earths, maybe it's other things like lithium. There is quite a big lithium deposit in the central Ukraine belt here. However, big by European standards, but if you put it against other kind of mega lithium reserve countries like Chile, like Australia, like Argentina, and even if you assume the best case scenario for Ukraine, it's still relatively small compared to the rest. It's not game-changing. And again, look at the US. The US has more lithium, considerably more lithium, than most other countries, including Ukraine. So it might well come back to, if the US wants to generate some extra money with these resources, it might come back to traditional stuff like coal. There's a lot of coal in Ukraine, not though as much as there is in America. There's lots of iron ore as well, again, ditto. Titanium, quite a big supply of titanium there as well, and uranium too. So maybe it's the traditional resources that could feed into this fund and might bring back some money, but it will be a long time before you actually see that coming into fruition.
OK, it's time to take a look at your sport now.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
I needed someone to look over my plans, so I went to a man who's got plenty of experience working behind the scenes in football.
What is it you think these mentors would bring? Do you think that's going to be a difficult role? Do you think the families or the players will want to hear it?
A lot of educational people coming out of college, coming out of university are going into the system. And I have nothing against that, but that leaves a massive void of experienced ex-professional players. If you look at Sir Alex Ferguson, Ancelotti, Guardiola, Harry Redknapp, they talk about the mentors in their life. Former players will understand the difficulties that these kids will find at the back end of their time in the academy.
So playing that back, people who've had experience of what it's like when you don't make it would be able to help people through that experience. I think that makes sense. What would the mentors encourage these kids to do?
The mentor can be, that little bit of glue between the football club and the families. Parents give up a hell of a lot, Richard, to help the kid get to where he wants to get. And a lot of the times they are as disappointed, if not more disappointed, than what the kids are when they're released.
How many mentors do you think it would be?
Well, I think in the first year, you're looking at around about 90. We want to put in place a system that looks after their education and their life after football. All the clubs run a BTEC scheme. It's remarkable. The system has almost 100% record of BTEC passes. We've spoken to Richard Jones at Brian.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
OK, let's take a look at your weather as you're heading out this Thursday. Well, it will settle over the next few days as high pressure begins to dominate from the south, bringing the risk of overnight frost and some dense patches of fog too. But this morning, it's a chilly start for central and western parts of the country, but it's milder over East Anglia and the southeast, where there's greater cloud cover. Heavy blustery showers over Yorkshire and Lincolnshire coasts will move away into the North Sea eventually. Temperatures will be close to average for this time of year, reaching about 7 or 8 Celsius in the north, 9 or 10 Celsius in the south. Coastal showers in the north and west will spread inland over time, turning wintry over the higher ground. It'll be mostly quiet to end the day. Still to come on The Breakfast Show, we'll be discussing the stories making headlines today in our News Review with Maury.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
The most significant
day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
heavy vehicle. Why only in America? People want their country to work. Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back, everyone. We will kick off our news review very shortly, but first let's go through what Wilfred's got coming up from 7 o'clock for you throughout the morning. We'll look ahead to Sir Keir Starmer's big meeting with Donald Trump in Washington, and at 7:15, Science Secretary Peter Kyle will tell us what he's hoping to see on the agenda. Plus, it's decision day, isn't it, for Gatwick Airport? What do the Conservatives think should happen with its second runway? We'll hear from Shadow Paymaster General Richard Holden. So much to get into on that. And then, really interesting this, a search for a missing Malaysian Airlines plane, MH370. This was 11 years ago, but we'll be speaking to the pilot and aviation consultant, Tim Atkinson. That was such a big story back in the day, but what we're going to be talking about now is what making news this morning.
Absolutely.
With Mari, which is great. Shall we kick off then, Mari, with the front page of the Eye? Back on Europe, on Putin and Meet the King. So they're basically, like you were saying earlier, trump cards are really there, really clear, and it's all to play for, potentially, if they can land the deal.
If they can land the deal, exactly that. The Eye are reporting about this possible state visit, and essentially whether, Number 10 is kind of dangling that in front of Donald Trump as a way to coax him or make him more amenable, let's say, to a deal that the UK feels is substantiated and also, long-term, solid and actually implementable. So, interesting here, they're talking about it's a 24-hour diplomatic blitz from the Prime Minister. I love that kind of language in the papers. And they're talking about how, actually, that Keir Starmer is insisting there is no discord, there is no lack of synergy in terms of the way the UK is feeling and the way the US is feeling, which is interesting. So he played down that kind of division. He said there's no issue between us, meaning the UK and the US, on this when it came to security guarantees. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? And are they going to give security guarantees? Donald Trump yesterday saying, I don't really want to give too many, don't want to give too much.
Did you find what Donald Trump said interesting, particularly about peacekeeping troops? Because what he was saying was that there'll be thousands of Americans there, engineers, project managers that will be digging for these rare minerals. So actually no one will threaten Ukraine while our people are there. But obviously not keen on peacekeeping troops and boots on ground.
Well, yeah, clearly. I mean, it's really interesting. So the UK government has been asked about this a little bit. They're being very cagey, understandably. But essentially what they're saying is actually, yes, if the US has, vested interests in Ukraine, if they have people there working there, companies there, what Donald Trump is arguing is essentially that will by default be a security guarantee. Although the way that Starmer is talking the rhetoric doesn't really match up as much as they would like to push that. It doesn't sound the same. And Trump also basically saying, you know, it's Europe's problem because it's Europe's neighbour. And so I think that as much as they would like to pretend that everything is absolutely bang on the money in terms of the synergy, it isn't. And the question can be, will they find a happy medium or a compromise that both sides are happy with, that Ukraine is happy with, and potentially could this state visit sweeten the deal? So yesterday, the PM was actually asked about the state visit, the possibility of one. He wouldn't comment on the possibility of offering a state visit. However, officials have actually been speaking to Sky News, and they do say they expect it within the next year. Okay. So it feels like that is going to be happening, and that the PM could essentially follow Theresa May's lead on this and could give Donald Trump a letter like Theresa May did in 2017. So I think watch this space when it comes to the state visit.
To come, isn't there? Yeah. The other story I wanted to talk to you about, this is the Daily Mail, and people would have seen this video yesterday afternoon, but some of our loyal viewers who stay with us and just watch Breakfast may not have seen it. Yes. So that's this video, this AI video, which features a glitzy hotel, dancers and a sunbathing Trump and Netanyahu in Gaza, this reimagined version of what it might look like. There were skyscrapers, there was a balloon of Donald Trump draped in gold. And on my social media, when I was opening it this morning, people are still talking about it. Yeah. And obviously there are two camps. There are one that are saying, actually, this is so atrocious. There's no reference to the loss of life. There's no reference to Palestinians. And then actually another emerging conversation that's happening online about this video is that it's Donald Trump being that disruptor, being that person that actually is undermining Hamas, because this would be so far away from what the militant group would want to see Gaza look like. And so it's that image of being a cat amongst pigeons, and that's what Donald Trump is so good at doing, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's difficult because on one hand, some people are going to argue this isn't necessarily what Donald Trump is going to do or wants to do. He's trying to get a reaction. He's trying to shock the world into doing something in Gaza and ending this war and finding a way for people to actually live peaceful lives. And as you say, on the other side, those like, for instance, Rory Stewart on Sky News last night, former Tory MP, he was saying this was a kind of almost an equivalent of ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and it had, as you say, no mention of the 40,000 people who've died recently in Gaza. So, some would say, it's just he's trying to poke the bear, and it's a bit of a controversy here, classic Trump. Others say they feel that it's a bit more sinister than that, and it feels like an erasure of a history, of a culture, of a people. So, as you say, been very widely criticised and potentially praised, depending on which way you look at it, but shocking either way.
Yeah, true. Let's go on now to the front page of the Daily Mail, because the Chagos Islands, that's surely going to come up in conversations with Donald Trump later.
Yeah, we expect it to be discussed between Trump and Starmer today. Now, the Daily Mail has a very specific view on the Chagos deal, so obviously bear that in mind. Yes. But nonetheless, they are saying it is a Chagos surrender. And this is really all about how the Prime Minister repeatedly refused at PMQs yesterday to give clarity as to whether or not the Chagos deal would be paid for by using the new uplift in defence spending. So Kemi Badenoch, she's been criticised very heavily for not being necessarily the most interesting person at PMQs, the most perhaps engaging or entertaining.
It's like a popularity contest sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, and often it's about being quick-witted, and it's about thinking on your feet, and it's about being a little bit entertaining, and that's something that Kemi Badenoch doesn't want to do. She doesn't want to engage with that. She wants to be serious, she wants to be fair. Some people are saying it's not working, but nonetheless, she did kind of bang the drum yesterday about the Chagos deal and wanted to get an answer. She never got an answer from the PM, and so he hasn't actually ruled out that cash being used for the Chagos deal, which, first of all, the Tories would say would not be good. They feel like it would be a strategic error. They worry that Mauritius is too close to China, is indebted to China, and therefore, by giving the Chagos Islands back to Mauritius, they feel that that would essentially put it closer to Chinese influence. But also, there's a debate around the International Court of Justice and the fact that the The ruling that they made around the Chagos Islands and being given back to Mauritius was not binding, so it was a recommendation rather than a hard ruling, as it were. And so, therefore, the Tories are saying it was a recommendation. It doesn't mean you have to say yes, and they're trying to say this is classic Starmer bowing down to his lawyer friend. I mean, it depends on how you see it, and there is a really big divide in opinion on this, but the Daily Mail going in one direction.
OK. I want to take viewers now to the Financial Times, and I wonder what the Science Secretary Peter Carl might make of a story like this. So, the story goes that Estonia is going to teach AI in schools, and this is going to be in support with the US tech companies too. So it's teaming up with the US to teach, I guess, artificial intelligence skills. This is at high school, so secondary school. Right. And it's kind of like built over the last sort of 30 years, this real leading power in digital literacy in Estonia, which I didn't know about before I read this article. But what they're doing is they want to develop a more critical thinking for students and understanding AI and prepare them better for the workplace and the job market that is currently what we have. So obviously, you know, that doesn't happen currently. But from September, 200,000 students, secondary school students, so that's like 16, 17-year-olds, will have this free access to AI learning tools. 3,000 teachers have already started to begin training. And I suppose getting ahead of the curve on this new and emerging field that we're all spending so much time to talk about. The other story, Mari, this is in The Sun, really interesting. It's basically saying a blood test that can detect dozens of types of cancer with no symptoms could soon be rolled out on the NHS as early as next year. So it's just a finger prick test, and it could detect some of those diseases that actually, when they're caught early, are treatable, which wanted to end on a feel-good, positive story there. Join us back after the break with Wilfred Frost. Well, all of your headlines after this short break.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. Coming up, the Prime Minister faces the biggest diplomatic test of his premiership.
Cards that Keir Starmer has at his disposal ahead of that meeting in the White House.
Plus, we'll have an update from the Vatican on the Pope's health in the next few minutes.
It's Thursday, the 27th of February. Your headlines. Sir Keir Starmer arrives in Washington for talks with President Trump, repeating calls for a US security guarantee on Ukraine. Hundreds of Palestinian prisoners are freed after Hamas released the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages. Phase 1 of the ceasefire deal is done, but Phase 2 hangs in the balance.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and lift off. Go Falcon, go to...
Blast off this morning for the deep space mission looking to the stars to mine precious resources. We'll discuss. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us here on Sky News Breakfast. The Prime Minister has landed in Washington, D.C. ahead of the biggest diplomatic test of his premiership so far, a meeting with Donald Trump, perhaps the biggest test period. In recent weeks, the US President has shocked allies with his comments on NATO, Europe's security and the war in Ukraine. Sir Keir Starmer's challenge will be to bring Mr. Trump on side to help ensure a secure future for Ukraine. A warning, this report from our US correspondent James Matthews contains flash photography.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
As business trips go, it's big. Peace in Ukraine will be the awkward negotiation between Prime Minister and President. At an embassy gathering last night, Sir Keir Starmer talked special relationship and special measures to meet Donald Trump's demands on defence.
This week, we've shown our willingness to defend, with the biggest sustained increase in our defence spending since the Cold War.
After Monday's French bromance, this is the British strand of a European effort. At the White House, it will be a meeting of two men who don't necessarily share one view. Sir Keir Starmer comes here seeking a US backstop, American security guaranteeing a peace agreement in Ukraine. Donald Trump didn't necessarily share the vision in a cabinet meeting yesterday.
I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that.
The UK's Prime Minister participated in a round-table discussion with business leaders last night. This was an event to introduce the UK's new ambassador, old Labour hand Peter Mandelson. For his speech last night, read Starmer's sentiments today.
We are living through a very, very significant moment for our alliance between our two countries and indeed for all the freedom-loving democracies in the world. I wouldn't say that we are being encircled by our adversaries. We're certainly not, but they're doing a little bit of ganging up.
Donald Trump has enjoyed the company of UK Prime Ministers in the past. He gave us the hand-holding with Theresa May and has spoken of his fondness for Starmer. A personal connection has endured through the years in this special relationship. Today will test its politics. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Well, as you might imagine, Sir Keir Starmer's visit dominates the front pages of the newspapers this morning. The Times saying the Prime Minister will tell President Trump that the USA is needed to hold back Putin. The Telegraph describes the upcoming meeting as a confrontation, saying the Prime Minister will tell the US President that Russia will invade Ukraine again unless America provides protection. The Guardian says it's a similar headline in The Guardian, which reports Sir Keir Starmer will stress the threat of another Russian invasion to Donald Trump. Well, let's discuss all of this with Mari and the significance of it. Mari, just firstly, let's touch on that. We said it's the most significant diplomatic meeting of his premiership. It's the most significant meeting of his premiership.
It's absolutely undeniable. It's the most significant moment. It is also... It's a do-or-die moment to an extent for Keir Starmer, because if he can prove himself to actually make this meeting a success, to find a way to make a connection with Donald Trump that is meaningful and respectful, to find a way to not poke the bear too much, but simultaneously show a level of strength. We know that Donald Trump reacts well to strength. He likes winners. Keir Starmer has a good mandate for having won the general election not long ago. There could be a huge prize available for Keir Starmer. But the question will be, can he rise to this challenge? And so I think with that meeting today, and in terms of what's on the agenda, so Number 10 are pushing really, really hard on the possibility of working with the US on AI and tech. And they're really trying to push this because they are trying to sell to the public that actually our cooperation with the US on Ukraine will help the economy, will boost growth, defence spending increasing will boost growth and increase the number of jobs. They are really trying to, as desperately as possible, make sure that the British public stay on side with the decisions that are being made at the moment and the rhetoric as well.
It's what's really interesting juxtaposition is it's the most important meeting for the Prime Minister's entire premiership. It's possibly not even the most important meeting for the President this week.
Yeah.
You know, with President Macron first and President Zelensky to come, a big cabinet gathering yesterday that was widely covered and televised, which I guess is a sign of the times for us as a country, alas. But equally, as we've kind of weighed things up over the last week or two as to whether expectations were very low, could he deliver a win? Has he played this like a little bit of a blinder by announcing this defence spending first of all? It kind of makes it harder for him to change the President's mind if the President isn't looking at Keir Starmer as his even top of agenda item for this week.
I think it's also difficult when you've had that meeting with Macron on Monday and then you've had the President coming out yesterday and really kind of bad-mouthing the EU in quite a fundamental way. Other people might argue, how successful was that meeting with Macron if the President was then really quite ready to bad-mouth the EU, which we know, obviously, France is a huge pivotal part of the EU. And so I think it is so difficult. Also, will the Chagos Islands come up in discussion today? For instance, we know that the Foreign Secretary's been talking about the US veto on that deal. There is so much. So I think in terms of the trump cards for Keir Starmer, let's not overblow it now. Let's not really go hard and say that, you know, these are the most powerful things he can do and he can persuade the President 100% with these trump cards. OK, it's not that. But they are still a little bit of influence. Number one, the fact that we are not in the EU if the US decides they want to have a bit of a trade war with the EU. Number two, like you say, the defence spending hike, it might just sweeten that conversation a little bit. Let's not, you know, get carried away there. And third of all, state visit for Donald Trump with the King, if that is also dangled in front of the President.
Oh, well, it should be if it's not already. I mean, the Chagos Islands, just to dwell on that, I think this is really interesting. Obviously, he's gone in advance with the defence spending boost, and it's come at a bit of a cost to some of his base by scrapping the spending on aid.
Yeah.
The Chagos Islands is an interesting one. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But if I was in their position, I would go pretending that you don't want to drop it, saying in PMQs yesterday you're not going to drop it, and then be like, well, look, we were forced to. And give yourself some political cover coming back to your base that might want to see it continue on its way through. But again, you outline it there. You're outlining the trump cards comparison, which I like. You know, there are a few levers for him to pull.
Yes.
And he could come back here with a bit of a victory. Final point I was just going to say there is, if we see those pictures again of him sitting around the table, this would have been the focus in normal times. He's got Steve Schwarzman to his left. Blackstone's just announced a massive new headquarters in London. He's the head of Blackstone. He's a real Anglophile. One more to his left, I should point out, is Jane Fraser, who doesn't often get, on the right of our picture there, enough coverage here. She is the single most impressive, successful British businesswoman in the world right now, the head of Citigroup, and a huge name in the US, and a Scot and a Brit, and interesting that she's there as well. Of course, any little business discussions are kind of irrelevant, relative to what's coming tomorrow. But Peter Mandelson's done quite a good job, short space of time. Kind of was quite centre of the limelight yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Grabbing a bit too much focus.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, he was hosting that event yesterday, and Keir Starmer gave some quite consequential comments at the Peter Mandelson event as well. And I think he is really trying to position himself at the centre of some of these meetings and discussions, and to try and prove himself as the great choice as ambassador to be able to kind of be that right-hand man or the third man, as the title of his book would argue. to really facilitate some of these discussions.
Right, great stuff. As always, we'll be talking to the government in about 5-10 minutes. Peter Kyle joins us today. But now, time for all of the day's other top stories. Liz got those for us.
Thank you so much, Wilfred. Let's take a look at those stories then. Israel has received the bodies of 4 hostages after Hamas handed them over in exchange for more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. The trade marks the end of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement. Let's go live now to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who is in Jerusalem for us. Alistair, this is the end of phase 1. What about phase 2?
Yeah, well, phase 1 officially ends this weekend, but I mean, this was the last hostage prisoner exchange, so to all intents and purposes, it does bring to an end this first phase in what is supposed to be a 3-phase ceasefire deal. As for phase 2, well, that's not going to be implemented immediately. The negotiations for that kind of barely really even started for various reasons. Phase 2 will be very hard to agree. It would make phase 1 almost look quite straightforward, because phase 2 means 2 key things. Firstly, it would mean the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and an end to the war. And there's many in the Israeli government who don't want that, and they're threatening to collapse the coalition if that happens. And it would also mean an end to Hamas's rule in Gaza, and that is probably something that Hamas is not willing to entertain either. So what might happen? Well, I think there's probably 2, maybe 3 scenarios. Firstly is that you can have an extension of phase 1, maybe for an agreed determined amount of time, 3-4 weeks. Some hostages are released, probably dead hostages rather than the living. Hamas would want to hold on to those for now, and some Palestinian prisoners are released. I think that's the most likely outcome. Hamas is also suggesting an all-for-all, end the war, release all the hostages in one go, have all the prisoners back that they want, and the IDF withdraw from Gaza fully and reconstruction continues on the Gaza Strip. I don't think that will happen imminently, if at all. And thirdly, is that it all collapses, the ceasefire collapses, and it's a return to the fighting.
OK, we'll leave it there for now. Alistair, thank you. Back here, a decision will be made today on whether Gatwick Airport will be allowed to expand. If Gatwick is given the green light to bring its emergency runway into regular use, it could mean an extra 100,000 flights a year. Earlier this week, Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander, who will make the decision, said there's no flight-shaming eco-warrior, that she's no flight-shaming eco-warrior, rather. Dentists have warned that thousands of extra appointments promised by the government will only cover a third of people who need urgent care. The British Dental Association says 1.5 million people could be left untreated, despite the rollout of an additional 700,000 appointments from April. US actor Michelle Trachtenberg has died at the age of 39. The star, best known for her role as Dawn Summers in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was found dead at her home in New York yesterday morning. Police are not treating her death as suspicious.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Now to a high-risk mission to scout for precious metals and minerals, not deep underground, but up in space. It's not going to be an easy mission, though, and it'll take 300 days to catch up with the asteroid in question, which is 1 million miles from Earth. Thomas Moore has been investigating whether the mission will be worth it or not.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff. Go, Falcon, go into ignition.
Odin thundered into the Florida sky, riding in a SpaceX rocket, heading out into the solar system, the first private spacecraft to venture so far. Its mission is to rendezvous with an asteroid and scout out its potential for mining. Asteroid 2022 OB5 is thought to be rich in platinum and similar metals, widely used in electronics and other critical technology. They're so valuable, the startup Astroforge says it's worth going the distance.
The problem is with Earth is that all of the good ore sources of platinum group metal we've mined. And everything we're looking at now is thousands of meters under the Earth. It's actually very, very difficult to go mine on Earth. We know this exists in space. We know it's readily available. Our mission is just, instead of going down, we want to go up.
Odin should catch up with the asteroid 1 million miles from Earth, then take detailed pictures. If they look promising, another spacecraft will follow, this time landing on the surface to confirm the company has struck platinum.
the little twinkles in there, those are little bits of metal.
At the Natural History Museum in London, there are meteorites that look like lumps of metal. Mining in deep space could make sense.
Metallic asteroids are much rarer than the stony ones, but they are there. They make up quite a substantial part of our meteorite collection here at the Natural History Museum, so we know that they're out there in space, and we know that they're incredibly rich in elements like platinum, but also cobalt and nickel. They're, you know, just a fantastic resource for many metals.
The same SpaceX rocket is also carrying a robotic moon lander called Athena that will drill into the lunar surface looking for water. As the cost of reaching space has plummeted, mining far from Earth has become economically viable, and our celestial neighbours are seen as a potential resource.
Well, Thomas, able to join us on set to discuss all of this fascinating stuff now. And so, Thomas, at the end there, you're mentioning that there's also on board this rocket another one that's going to the moon to search for water. So it's a sort of lots of exploration happening at the moment. And talk us about the main part of that. So this is sort of rare earths and minerals on an asteroid.
Yes.
Like, what type of thing might we find?
So all the critical metals that we're needing for a lot of the technology we use on a day-to-day basis, but is in short supply on Earth or is difficult to reach and expensive. And that's why it's now becoming viable to go all the way to an asteroid, 1 million miles, and do the mining there and bring back the precious metals to Earth. That is the challenge. And when you're seeing here the launch with SpaceX, and SpaceX have brought down the cost of getting to space, that too is part of the sums.
So SpaceX is launching them into orbit, into space, carrying these other spacecrafts that are owned by private companies that are paying SpaceX a fee. If they find something and discover almost like an oil reserve or whatever you might discover, who owns that? Rare mineral.
It is a grey area. So there's the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. 110 countries have signed it. And that says that exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit of all countries and shall be the province of all mankind. It sounds quite pompous, but it's clear that countries cannot own asteroids. Companies probably can't. It's a grey area, never tested in the courts. But if there's questionable ownership of the asteroid, what about the resources? And you could look at, say, fish in the high seas. Nobody owns the high seas, but we can still fish them. We can sell those fish. So could that also apply to resources brought back from asteroids? It's unknown, untested in courts, and it's a really grey area. Space law is a great place to go and work.
Do you know what blows my mind with this story? That asteroid in question is 1 million miles away from Earth. I mean, it's a risky mission, isn't it?
Yes, and there's no guarantee that this company is actually going to get there, and they have been very open about this. They built this spacecraft in 10 months on a budget, and they're not sure that they will get there. But this, I think, is the beginning of a new dawn where we will see space exploration by private companies and plundering resources far from Earth. But it is so difficult to find something just 100 metres across, 1 million miles away.
I love it.
Back next hour, Thomas. I have more questions.
It's fine.
Plenty more. Good. Well, we'll keep this conversation going throughout the morning here on Sky News Breakfast. For now, though, Thomas, thanks so much. Now, we're going to get an update on the Pope's health. Lisa Holland has that for us in Vatican City. What's the latest, Lisa?
Good morning. Yes, just one line from the Vatican this morning saying that the Pope slept well and is now resting. It was his 13th night at the Gemelli Hospital here in Rome. Remember, of course, that it's his longest stay in hospital. He's been treated for pneumonia in both lungs and also bronchitis and a respiratory tract infection. As has become customary, first thing in the morning, just a line to confirm that the Pope has had a restful night. We should have further updates throughout the course of this morning and, of course, in the early evening, which tends to be a more detailed bulletin. Yesterday evening, we were told that the Pope's condition remains critical, although within those parameters stable. He's still got kidney problems. He's still requiring high-flow oxygen. But we were told on Wednesday that he was able to speak with doctors and with aides and had also been eating.
Lisa, thanks so much for that. Lisa Holland there for us in Rome. Now, we're joined now by the Science Secretary, Peter Kyle, to discuss all of the day's key developments on behalf of the government. A very good morning to you, Minister. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with the Prime Minister's trip to the United States. There's a lot of things on the agenda, of course. Is the number one item to secure a security guarantee from the US for whatever does evolve in terms of peacekeeping in Ukraine?
Ukraine is the number one item. There's a lot that's going to be on the agenda. Of course, when you come to these sorts of meetings, both sides will have different priorities. The idea is, for the first meeting, is to build the relationship, is to establish the special relationship for the era that we're living in. But Ukraine is of particular pointed importance at this moment in time because we're in the middle of this process where it looks like we will be negotiating a way forward, hopefully, that leads to peace. Now, we had President Macron earlier in the week, we've got the Prime Minister now, and we have President Zelensky coming together with Donald Trump later this week. So it's a really important week. What we're pushing for, obviously, is a sustainable peace that respects the sovereignty, the land integrity of Ukraine. That's what we're pushing for. And, of course, where there is a difference between the party leaders and all the parties, and President Zelensky's voice is the most important one through this, that we want to make sure that we find common ground going forward.
If there isn't a security guarantee from the US, then Article 5 of NATO, and with it, NATO really in full, is sort of dead.
Well, the Prime Minister has said very, very clearly that that is what he is pushing for. We've been quite explicit about that. And, of course, the Prime Minister has been speaking frequently to President Zelensky through this process. So I'm not going to talk about what might or might not come out of these discussions. President Zelensky is there later in the week as well. But right now, that is what we believe is the best way forward.
Obviously, he's boosted defence spending before going there. No doubt that will appeal to some level to President Trump. He could also offer to U-turn on the Chagos Islands.
No, the deal we believe is on the table is a good deal. It hasn't been published yet, so when we do get to the point where it is agreed, we will publish it in Parliament and allow Parliament to discuss and debate the deal. Look, we believe it's a good deal. It is very important because this has always been part of the relationship with the US. The base is a joint, or is a US base that the UK uses as well. It's a joint base, and that it's part of our relationship. So it's very important for us that the US actually agree the deal that we have sealed. Again, this will be part, perhaps, of the discussions that happened between the Prime Minister and the President today. And let's see what comes out the other side.
Do you hope more collaboration on AI will be a consequence of this bilateral?
I do, and I know full well the Prime Minister is keen to discuss AI technology, but also find areas where we can collaborate to a greater extent going forward with the US. There are certain things, if you think about some of the latest medical technology, some of the latest climate technology, if you look at the uses of AI and the impact it can have on society, and some of the emerging technologies such as quantum, these are things that the US and the UK are real global leaders. And it is incredibly important in these technologies that you have Western liberal democracies leading the race for these technologies. By the US and the UK working together, we believe that we can stay absolutely clearly ahead of some of the rest of the global competition, and that would deliver benefits for both. So those are the sorts of things that the Prime Minister is really keen to explore on behalf of British people, but also for the global good as well.
It's really interesting to hear you frame it that way, because I guess one aspect that some people are wondering in this desperate race to win at AI, simplifying it, but to attract investment and get the UK to the top is that we're willing to sort of race to the bottom on rules and regulations. Obviously, there's been a big pushback by some of the nation's greatest creative minds in the last week during the consultation period. Is it wrong if a human profits off another human's copyrighted material? And by extension, is it wrong if a machine does that?
Infringing copyright is, of course, wrong. I mean, breaking the law, it's breaking the law, so breaking the law is wrong. But we are living in an age, actually, where you have the AI companies who are harvesting information from other territories. We're talking about what's called large language models. Not a single large language model has been trained in this country, which means that they are harvesting the information from other territories, primarily China and America and some of the other countries in the Gulf as well. Now, it's really important that we make sure we modernise the law because the copyright law is hundreds of years old. So it is fit for purpose going forward. We also have children who are growing up here who are data programmers, engineers. They are going to be key to the future of AI. What we don't want is to kill that industry so that those kids have to go abroad in order to thrive. And also the creative industries are using AI. I don't want them to all be using AI that comes from America. I want that to be using AI that's created in Britain. So what I won't do is choose between one side and another. We have the second largest creative arts industry in the world. We have the third largest market for AI in the world. These are both industries of the future as well, and I want both of them to thrive in Britain. It is going to be challenging, but we will find a way through, and at some point I will legislate for it, and Parliament can have its say on specific legislation.
It's such a difficult debate. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but just because, for example, China might be allowing copyright laws to be broken, should that mean that the same should happen here, or that you should relax it? Just to come back, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the consultation, I think, described the main objective that you have is for copyright restrictions to be relaxed, for AI developers to have to flag if they are using copyrighted material, but creative industries would have to opt out of that being the process, so rather than the law as standing to rule that being out.
What we're trying to do is I'm insisting that before I legislate, that AI companies can prove that they can have transparency in the way that their models use and consume copyrighted material, all creative material. I want to find ways where the artists today can be remunerated when their work is used, but also have this fundamental right that if they don't want AI models to use and have access to the material, that they can opt out for it. So that's what I've put forward in a consultation. The consultation only closed this week, and I will legislate for it at some point into the future. But I think these are the sort of bedrocks of the discussions we need to have in the future. But the status quo we have at the moment is simply not working, because all of the AI models are using this material already. They're trained outside of the United Kingdom, and at the moment, the technology that's being evolved is not benefiting our country enough. So we need to make sure that we are staying ahead of this technology development, because it's so crucial to the future of our economy and society. And I don't want our economy and society forever and a day to be dependent on technology which comes from other countries. We need that to be developed here. And that's what I'm really trying to find a way forward for.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about this in such detail. I know the law hasn't arrived yet, but just clarify one thing for me. Why would people have to choose to opt out from their copyrighted material being used by AI? Surely the default should be that it's not allowed to be used by AI unless the copyright holder says, yes, you can. I don't understand why it's that way around.
So we're talking about technology which needs enormous amounts of data in order to be effective and efficient. We need to make sure that the market for AI being developed in Britain is a thriving market. But I also need to make sure that those people who do feel strongly about it do have the right to opt out and make sure that their material isn't included in the harvesting and the use of general information that's available publicly. Now, this is part of the consultation. It only closed this week, and I haven't actually had access all the time to start digesting the 4,000 responses that we had. I'm really open-minded about how we move forward, but there's one principle I have. I will not have one side forcing me to make a choice between one or the other. We have two fantastic, talented, wealth-creating industries, the creative industries and the AI technology industry. We need to find a way forward. You know, I am the technology minister, so I've been focusing on understanding how far I can take the technology sector to make movements towards the creative arts industry. We also have a culture secretary, Lisa Nandy, and her department's been engaging very fulsomely with the culture sector. And then the minister which is seeing this legislation through, or is responsible for it, is Chris Bryant, who's a minister in both departments. So as a government, we're really responding well to the challenge, but it is going to be a very tricky issue. Lots of people have very strong views, but as I said before, I will not be forced to make a choice between one or the other. We will find a way forward because Britain needs us to.
It's really interesting to hear your responses on that. We look forward to seeing the details as the legislation emerges. Just finally, I wanted to ask you about a pretty major U-turn from BP yesterday in terms of backing down on their targets, particularly as it relates to the environment. What do you make of that?
Lots of companies, lots of organisations are finding their way through the challenges as we get closer and closer to the targets that have been set and they have set for themselves. What I'm responsible for is for government policy, and we are determined to get to net zero by 2050. You've seen some of the ways that we've responded since we came into office, which is only 7 months ago. We have accelerated our drive towards renewables. You've also seen recently that the wealth and the jobs that are being created from that drive have actually increased in recent weeks. So we know that they're being highly profitable sectors now in the UK. And where we are designing technology which is new and being used in that move towards climate technology and climate change challenges that we're tackling, then that is giving us a competitive edge in the global market as well. So Britain is doing its best, its best on behalf of Britain. Other companies and organisations are finding their own way through these challenging periods.
Bottom line is, you don't mind. It's up to BP. They're a private company.
We as a country will get to that target, and then as we move forward, we will be requiring other companies to be part of it because they will contribute towards British overall targets as well. And that is the key thing. We will get to our targets. How other people and organisations make their way towards it is up to them. But the British law is the British law, and Britain will get to net zero by 2050.
Peter Carr, great to catch up. Thanks for joining us.
You too. Thanks, Will.
We have some breaking news to bring you. According to reports coming from Romania, the Tate brothers, Andrew and Tristan, have left Romania. It comes after the Donald Trump administration leaned on Romania to relax restrictions on Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan. It was claimed that Mr. Trump's special envoy, who admits supporting the Tate brothers, personally intervened after American officials requested their passport be returned. The pair had been released from house arrest, but had not been allowed to leave the country until, according to reports today. We'll get more from Siobhan Robbins in a few moments' time. But in the meantime, we're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. And to come, criticism that Ofcom isn't being tough enough with tech giants that fail to protect children. We'll speak to the chief executive of the Molly Rose Foundation. Plus, who will be the next leader of Scotland's Alba party? We'll hear from the two contenders hoping to take up the reins. And the daring space mission that could change the way we mine our most precious resources. Lots more to come.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing to civilians and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, why MPs are concerned Ofcom isn't doing enough to protect children online. But first, a reminder of all the top stories this morning. Leah's got that for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. On to breaking news this morning. We've got reports coming out of Romania that say the Tate brothers, that's Andrew and Tristan, have left Romania. This comes after the Donald Trump administration leaned on Romania to relax those restrictions on Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan. The pair have been released, we're hearing, from house arrest, but had not been allowed to leave the country. We'll get more on that as it comes. Elsewhere, so Keir Starmer will meet Donald Trump in Washington today for talks on the future of Ukraine. It'll be the first time the two leaders speak in person since the US president's inauguration last month. The PM has called on the US to provide a security guarantee for Ukraine, but faces an uphill battle.
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that.
The bodies of 4 Israeli hostages handed over by Hamas have arrived at a forensic testing facility in Tel Aviv. The remains were exchanged for more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. This is part, of course, of that ceasefire deal, that phase 1 ceasefire deal. It marks the end of the first phase of the agreement. At the second stage, it still hasn't been finalised. We'll be discussing that on the show today also. Back here, the Metropolitan Police has been talking about a new charter for stop and search powers. The Met has pledged to improve training so that officers have a better understanding of the communities they serve. There will also be, this is interesting, regular and random reviews of how the scheme is operating. Dentists have warned that the thousands of extra appointments promised by the government will only cover a third of people who need urgent care. The British Dental Association says 1.5 million people could be left untreated. This is despite the rollout of an additional 700,000 appointments from April.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and lift off. Go faster, go.
And a tiny probe has made its way into space to try and mine an asteroid for platinum. If successful, scientists say the mission could allow us to maintain our way of life without destroying the planet.
We did just want to bring you an update on that breaking news story on the Tate brothers. Sky's approached their spokesperson. She's not yet confirmed whether they have left Romania or not. We'll keep across that story, and we'll be speaking to our correspondent Siobhan Robbins, who's in Berlin, has been following that story, as you know, for quite a few months and years. We'll be getting an update from Siobhan in just a moment, but Romanian reports that they have left the country, of course, was the breaking news a few moments ago. Now, Ofcom has been accused by MPs of not doing enough to implement the Online Safety Act. The media regulator is being urged to toughen up its stance on tech giants and make sure no platform is allowed to avoid taking responsibility for children's safety. I'm joined now by Andy Burrows, the Chief Executive of the Molly Rose Foundation, an organisation that works to protect children online. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
So when it comes to the implementation of this act, and of course, maybe it's worth you reminding people when this act was passed and so on and so forth, what aspect of it is not sufficiently being implemented in your eyes?
So over the last year, since the Online Safety Act was passed, Ofcom has really been putting the flesh on the bones on how it will implement its regulatory scheme. And unfortunately, every time we've seen an announcement from Ofcom, we've seen timidity, we've seen a lack of ambition. What we heard yesterday from the Minister in this parliamentary debate was actually the suggestion that Ofcom has been consulting on its measures primarily to try and minimise the risk of judicial review, of litigation from companies. And lots of MPs, and we would agree with this assessment, would say that actually the regulator has not been paying enough attention to the urgent challenge of preventing children of preventable harm. And we know that children and young people in this country are being exposed to a wave of preventable harms on social media. We were founded following the death of 14-year-old Molly Russell. Unfortunately, we know that we lose one young person aged 10 to 19 by suicide, where there is a technology element every single week. This is a really urgent challenge.
Andy, what changes do you feel need to be put in place to protect children? I grapple with this all the time. I've got 2 little ones at home that want to be on a device, that want to explore. online world, whether it's, YouTube or gaming, what needs to happen to protect young people, do you think?
Well, technology is a fundamental part of all of our children's lives, and that toothpaste isn't going back in the tube. But ultimately, when children are using the big social networks, the big gaming platforms, these are platforms that are designed with a business model where the emphasis is on how long children are spending on their screens. It's eyeballs on screens. It's looking to create the most compelling product possible. There hasn't been the emphasis on safety. Now, that's why we really need to see online safety regulation succeed. But when we're talking about some of the largest companies in the world, we need the regulator to be showing its teeth, and that's really what we're not seeing right now.
Well, let's touch on that a little bit more. I mean, is the regulator, is Ofcom not tech-savvy enough? Is it stuck in the television age? Is it not got enough funding, not enough teeth? Was the bill not sufficiently clear? If Ofcom is saying that we're worried we're going to be sued, they might have some legitimate concerns there if the law didn't go far enough.
Well, certainly what we're seeing from Ofcom is a distinct lack of ambition. They are being cautious in the face of really pronounced urgent challenges. But that has also exposed some pretty clear systemic weaknesses with the way that the original Act was drafted. And that's why we've sent a very clear message to the Prime Minister. We met the Prime Minister a few weeks ago, urging him to commit to a new Act that can strengthen this regime, that can fix aspects of the regime. One of the big problems right now is that essentially, if some of the big tech platforms comply with a checklist that Ofcom has set out in its codes of practice, then they're taken as being compliant. What that essentially means is that some of the big tech services, the Metas of the world, the TikToks of the world, could actually scale back what they currently do and be taken as compliant. That's not what Parliament envisaged.
Are you worried that that's not going to materialise, further action from the government? Because, I mean, the mood music of all of this has changed, not specifically as it relates to children's safety on online platforms, but more broadly with the election of the new president in the US and all of the mood music around freedom of speech. The mood music we just heard on a totally separate area from the government minister about wanting to attract AI investment. Was the sort of peak moment for you to get a law passed on this front in the past rather than in the future?
Well, our fear certainly is that we are going backwards when it comes to children's online safety. Obviously, what we've seen from some of the big tech companies, from Mark Zuckerberg since Donald Trump's election, is a bonfire of safety measures. Here in the UK, I think we are concerned. I mean, we just had the Secretary of State in this seat saying that his job is to further the tech industry. That's absolutely right, but he's also the Minister, the Secretary of State responsible for online safety. And I think we've got a very clear message now for the Prime Minister, for Sir Keir Starmer. There are very loud voices from within the tech sector. There's very distinct pressures, obviously, geopolitical pressures now from the US and elsewhere, but there is a very clear call from parents right across this country. Our polling shows 85% of parents want a new Act, and I think if the government has the ambition and the bravery to fix this Act and to tackle these issues once and for all, parents watching this right across the country this morning will cheer the Prime Minister on.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that. What advice can you give parents? Because everyone watching this might feel it's out of their control, It's these tech companies or it's government, but parents need to have tools. What are you telling parents that come to you? What should they do? How can they protect their children better?
Leah, my advice is always the most simple, which is have regular conversations with your child. I know lots of parents will, kind of worry about having these conversations, that our kids will know much more than us. Have those regular conversations. Work together to make sure, for example, that you've got the highest safety settings on your account. And the reason that ultimately is really important is because the worst cases that I've seen are where children don't feel they can come to you as parents or to a trusted adult if something goes wrong. Have those regular conversations. Make it a part of what you talk about with your children day to day, and then you can work together.
Andy, thanks for joining us. Great to see you. Andy Burrows, CEO of the Molly Rose Foundation. Now, Alex Salmond was the driving force behind the political drive for Scottish independence. Following his death last October, he leaves a vacuum at the top of the party he formed to keep that fight alive, Alba. Our Scotland correspondent, Conor Gillis, talked exclusively to both of the candidates running to replace him as leader and sent this report.
You look really well.
Yeah, well, same with you. We haven't changed a bit. You're looking much older.
He was the colourful, complicated face of Scottish independence. The leader of the Alba party, a vehicle for Alex Salmond amid his bitter SNP split. But his death leaves these two, Ash Regan or Kenny McCaskill, vying to replace him in a contest that's been engulfed in infighting.
I think we've got a real chance.
Visiting a window factory, this Salmond ally is accusing McCaskill of bullying amid claims he disobeyed orders.
I think Kenny's going to look back in the near future and regret some of the actions of the previous months. You know, Alex Salmond used to always tell me that in a political party, rational people need to bump along with each other. Sadly, we've not seen people bumping along with each other. So either that means they're not being acting rational, or it means they're not in a position that they're fit to lead a political party.
Are you a bully?
No. Mr McElhinney is causing a great deal of upset and distress to his widow, to his family. I think he should cease and desist at the time of Alex's death. I'm required to speak to him on behalf of the family. He has been, suspended. He has since been dismissed on gross misconduct, but the NEC has terminated his employment.
This is really messy, isn't it? It's really, really messy.
It is certainly something we would rather not have had, but the position, the case for independence remains clear.
The other contender, an SNP defector, seems to be distancing herself from Alex Salmond.
Alba was struggling to cut through, you're absolutely right, which is why I'm saying we absolutely cannot continue the way we were. It has allowed the party to drift leaderless, and it is descending into a little bit of chaos right now.
And would Alba work with Nigel Farage?
If you're asking me, would I ever go into a coalition with the Reform Party in a formal basis? Absolutely not. But if you're asking me, would Alba be a constructive political force in the Parliament working for the things that are important for the people of Scotland? Absolutely.
And that means working with Reform on a case-by-case basis, potentially?
I would work with any party on a case-by-case basis if I felt it was the right thing for the people of Scotland.
There we go.
The question is, with bitter divisions being exposed and very few votes being cast overall for Alba when Alex Salmond was here, is it all but over for his brainchild? Conor Gillis, Sky News, Edinburgh.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning.
And lift off. Go Falcon, go into ignition.
Why hunting for metals deep in space could soon be a reality.
And we'll be closely numbered.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal.
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
Had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid. And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people. That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're back. A tiny probe has been launched into space to find out whether asteroids could be mined for precious metals like platinum. If successful, scientists say the mission could allow us to maintain our way of life without destroying the planet. Well, here to give us his take is space commentator Andrew Land. Andrew, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. What scale of risk is being taken by this exploration, and how likely is it to be successful in finding some of these particular minerals and metals that they're looking for?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yes, it is a big risk. It always is when a private company decides to enter into the space game. They've got to get the vehicle to there. And the navigation is always going to be the hard bit, catching up an asteroid to actually get there. But the rewards are potentially phenomenal. It's a spacecraft equipped with lots of cameras and sensors to study this asteroid and to find out exactly what its composition is. And if this works out pretty good, they'll have already proven the technology to get a spacecraft to it. Then they're going to land on it. So the risks are high, but the rewards are tremendous. In any sort of prospecting program, you've got to have a 30% return. That's the bottom line. But let's take an example. The NASA are sending a spacecraft to an asteroid called Psyche. There is possibly enough nickel iron on Psyche to supply the world demand for millions of years. Think of that. So that's quite an important step, that the raw materials out there. I mean, here's a piece of nickel iron. This is a nickel iron from a meteorite. So this is the kind of raw material we need. For instance, when nickel iron production on this planet is going up, we need it for a whole host of things, batteries, industrial processes. And the cost to actually get that out of the Earth, your science correspondent was put it in perfect symmetry about that, about how expensive it is to get the material out. This is going to be more cost effective. So although there is a risk putting the money in initially to get there and do the study, the potential rewards are fantastic.
Andrew, great to have you on. How game-changing is this, and how excited personally are you?
I'm very excited because the possibility of mining asteroids or mining on the moon has been something that's been there for a long time. I always joke about it's a little bit camp film, but it's a good film anyway, by Jerry Anderson, which was called Moon 02, made about '69, and that's about mining asteroids and about mining on the moon, where people are prospecting. And that got me excited as a kid, and I thought, that's interesting. Could that be possible? We're actually at that stage now. I mean, it's quite fantastic, because the other thing which will do this, if we get things like platinum, for instance, iridium, osmium, we really need this material for our technologies down here, but the costs are so high. The abundance of it on asteroids is so high that by the time you start mining and bringing it back, the cost of that product will actually fall, which will be a good thing in itself for industry, because it's availability. And that's what's making this exciting now. If we're talking about how we push our species forward with our technology, our resources on the Earth are limited. We've got issues of environmental problems down here. But out in space, that is the way we move forward. If you like, it's the next step for us as a species. And I'm always thinking...
Well, I was going to say, Andrew, I like that you mentioned a movie there, because when we're talking about landing on a moving asteroid, it obviously reminds me of one of the great movies of our time, in Armageddon, and it sort of suggests that wasn't as far-fetched. It wasn't as far-fetched as some people might have expected, and obviously the script was fantastic in that movie as well. In terms of my question, though, it's yet another private company that's driving this, launched into space on a rocket from another private company in SpaceX. I mean, is this the business to be in now? How many companies are we talking about? And are they, while taking risks, are they making a lot of money?
There's about 6 companies which are actually looking at this very carefully. And you also got the state players such as China, which is why China are going into space. They're looking for mineral resources as well. So there are big players in this game. And yes, private sector in the West seems to be the way to go forward. We only have to look at Elon Musk, where Elon Musk has gone from nowhere to, with only a $5 billion investment. I mean, it seems a lot, but $5 billion is actually quite a lot. I think how much the train we're building here, HS2, is costing. From $5 billion, he's got a reusable spacecraft that can put heavy payloads into space, possibly go to the moon and Mars, while the state side of it is struggling. So yes, private industry with very driven individuals bringing very talented people around them is probably the way to go with this now. And we've reached a technology stage where it is actually going to be cost effective to do it. So yes, in the West, we've got a model now which seems to be working exceptionally well. And of course, people investing into these things have a potential of making large sums of money, very similar to where we saw with investments going in the 18th century when we're starting to explore the New World, for instance, trying to get resources from there.
Cost effective, yes, but the turnaround, this asteroid is like a million miles away from Earth. So it's going to take quite a while to get what we want, potentially.
That's the nature of the game. I mean, that's the nature of the game. These things are far away, so therefore you have to take time to go and do it, and you have to factor that into your model of your business model. But that was the same, for instance, if we look at it again, it collaborates nicely with the 18th century when you were looking at that, where a ship going around to the other side of the world would take many months to get what material you wanted and bring it back again. So it is comparable to that. So we've been down this road before to a certain degree. It is high risk, as you rightly said, but the rewards are going to be very, very high if it comes off.
Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew Lound there talking about Armageddon, I hope, is one of your favourite films?
Up there.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you're being truthful with that, but I appreciate you pretending.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It is a classic, come on.
Oh.
Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck, Liv Tyler. Oh,
no.
Brilliant movie. Need to watch it again.
No.
Need to watch it again. Lots more to come after this short break on Sky News Breakfast. We'll have all of the day's top stories, of course, ahead of the Prime Minister's all-important meeting with President Trump in Washington, D.C. in a matter of hours.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock. Breaking news. The Tate brothers have reportedly left Romania.
Plus, the Prime Minister faces his biggest diplomatic test of his premiership.
We'll look at the top trump cards that Keir Starmer has at his disposal ahead of that meeting in the White House.
It's Thursday, the 27th of February. Your headlines. Reports in Romania that controversial internet personalities Andrew and Tristan Tate have left the country for the US. Sir Keir Starmer arrives in Washington for talks with President Trump, hoping a boost to British defence will ensure a US security guarantee for Ukraine.
We've shown our willingness to defend, with the biggest sustained increase in our defence spending since the Cold War.
Hundreds of Palestinian prisoners are freed after Hamas released the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages. Phase 1 of the ceasefire deal is done, but Phase 2 hangs in the balance. Blast off this morning for the deep space mission looking to the stars to mine precious resources. Very good morning to you. We start with the breaking news that there are reports in Romania that controversial internet personality Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan have left the country and are headed for the United States. The pair, who've been under house arrest, are facing a series of legal battles in the country, as well as in the UK and the US itself. This development follows reports that the Trump administration had lobbied their Romanian counterparts to ease the travel restrictions placed on the brothers, who are both dual US-UK nationals. The pair had previously been released from house arrest, but were not allowed to leave Romania. They denied charges of human trafficking, sexual misconduct and money laundering, as well as starting an organised crime group. Well, Sky News has approached a spokeswoman for the brothers, but she has not yet confirmed their departure. We're going to have more on that story throughout the morning for you as and when we have it. Now, the Prime Minister has landed in Washington, D.C. ahead of the biggest diplomatic test of his premiership so far, meeting with President Trump. In recent weeks, the US President has shocked allies with his comments on NATO, Europe's security and the war in Ukraine. Well, Sir Keir Starmer's challenge will be to bring Mr. Trump on side to help ensure a secure future for Ukraine. A warning that this report from our US correspondent James Matthews contains flash photography.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
As business trips go, it's big. Peace in Ukraine will be the awkward negotiation between Prime Minister and President. At an embassy gathering last night, Sir Keir Starmer talked special relationship and special measures to meet Donald Trump's demands on defence.
This week, we've shown our willingness to defend, with the biggest sustained increase in our defence spending since the Cold War.
After Monday's French bromance, this is the British strand of a European effort. At the White House, it will be a meeting of two men who don't necessarily share one view. Sir Keir Starmer comes here seeking a US backstop, American security guaranteeing a peace agreement in Ukraine. Donald Trump didn't necessarily share the vision in a cabinet meeting yesterday.
I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that.
The UK's Prime Minister participated in a round-table discussion with business leaders last night. This was an event to introduce the UK's new ambassador, old Labour hand Peter Mandelson. For his speech last night, read Starmer's sentiments today.
We are living through a very, very significant moment for our alliance between our two countries and indeed for all the freedom-loving democracies in the world. I wouldn't say that we are being encircled by our adversaries. We're certainly not, but they're doing a little bit of ganging up.
Donald Trump has enjoyed the company of UK Prime Ministers in the past. He gave us the hand-holding with Theresa May and has spoken of his fondness for Starmer. A personal connection has endured through the years in this special relationship. Today will test its politics. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Mari's with us to discuss the significance of this trip. We said their biggest diplomatic moment of his premiership, but it's more than that. It's the biggest moment, period, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you rightly pointed out earlier, it's a huge moment for Starmer, but it's not necessarily a huge moment for Trump. I think the difficulty for Starmer will first of all, be really trying to kind of hammer home what he is looking for out of this meeting. So we know that the rhetoric between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer around security guarantees has not been aligned, despite Keir Starmer and Number 10 saying that they're totally in synergy on that. It doesn't really appear to be the case. You saw that in James Matthews' report just then. And I think the question will be, what is Keir Starmer really looking for out of this meeting? We can have a listen to Peter Kyle, Secretary of State for Tech and Science, speaking to you just a few minutes ago, outlining what they are hoping to achieve from this meeting.
There's a lot that's going to be on the agenda. Of course, when you come to these sorts of meetings, both sides will have different priorities. The idea is, for the first meeting, is to build a relationship, is to establish the special relationship for the era that we're living in. But Ukraine is of particular pointed importance at this moment in time, because we're in the middle of this process where it looks like we will be negotiating a way forward, hopefully, that leads to peace.
So you see Peter Kyle there outlining what they're kind of looking for. I think Ukraine aside, they are also very, very keen to talk about trade, to talk about tech and AI, which is why he was on this morning, and our relationship with US companies and the US economy when it comes to that. And interestingly, perhaps also the Chagos deal, but I know we're going to speak about that later. And I think the difficulty really in terms of the kind of trump cards for Keir Starmer to play, as it were, he's got 3 trump cards, none of which are, let's say, you know, a game changer by themselves, but perhaps the combination could get some level of success out of that meeting. First of all, is that defence spending hike that we saw a couple of days ago. The expectation is hopefully that will demonstrate to the US we're serious on defence and we're listening to what Donald Trump is saying rather than just ignoring his criticisms. Second of all will be the fact that we are not part of the EU anymore, and we know that Donald Trump yesterday was talking quite a lot about the EU and his criticisms of the EU, or perhaps dislike of the EU. And third of all is the royal family, and being able to dangle a state visit in front of Trump and hope that all those 3 together might just persuade him to just listen a little bit to what the UK is saying.
And as you said, potentially the Chagos Islands, although clearly Peter Kyle pushed back as to whether that was even on the table when we spoke to him earlier. I mean, I do think it's interesting, whether it's down to him or Macron on Ukraine making progress, I don't think it really matters. But we already had a step earlier in the week where he suggested European boots on the ground is something that might happen.
Yeah.
If Keir Starmer can get some kind of pledge that that would be backed up by the US as well, and at the same time, if in the next month we see tariffs imposed on the EU but not on the UK, I think you'd have to come away from this and say that that is a big diplomatic victory for Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
But that security guarantee seems the hardest to get at this point. Yeah. Whereas, you know, if tariffs come on the EU but not on the UK, I think that's a significant victory, but it might be what we might expect at this point.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think when it comes to the idea of boots on the ground, the Kremlin is saying absolutely not, it's not acceptable, and they are saying what Donald Trump is saying is not the case. So the question will be, can Donald Trump persuade the Kremlin? Are the Kremlin just kind of grandstanding, or is that genuinely their hardline position? When it comes to tariffs, you're absolutely right. If we're exempt, could that be an opportunity? The downside is, when it comes to tariffs on the EU, it might still affect us as a kind of knock-on effect. So I think there are elements where success can come out of that meeting, but the question will be the long-term impacts, and we alone are not the only ones able to make that work.
They're all having lunch together, aren't they?
Yes, they're having lunch in the Oval Office.
Do you know what they're eating?
We don't know what they're eating. We don't know what's on the menu yet.
I like when we get those readouts.
I know.
David Lammy told me, I can't remember if this was on camera or off. I think it was as he walked away from an interview here, but when they had their meal at Trump Tower, they had chicken.
Yeah. OK, yeah.
He didn't expand on it. I don't know what type of chicken it was.
Posh
but if you're in the Oval Office, it's probably not going to be something sort of, you know, like a chicken stew, because it's going to be messy.
Yeah, surely something, finger food perhaps. I mean, Donald Trump, doesn't he love McDonald's? So some chicken nuggets?
Could be. I mean, look, you see, this is the important topic.
This is the thing.
I really want to know now. There'll definitely be Diet Coke involved, because he always has a Diet Coke.
And plastic straws.
Plastic straws.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that would be quite amusing to see if David Lammy and Keir Starmer embrace a plastic straw or not.
I think
it'd be a small price to pay if you get a security guarantee.
Yeah, imagine if there's a massive diplomatic splat over a straw. I mean, hey.
There we go. Well, we'll bring you this and much more from the bilat throughout the day. But I reckon everyone now wants to know that more than anything, what's going to be on the menu. Mari, great stuff. Thanks so much. Time for all of the day's other stories now. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Really appreciate that. So, listen, Israel has received the bodies of 4 hostages. This is after Hamas handed them over in an exchange for more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. Now, the trade marks the end of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has the latest for you.
Phase 1 officially ends this weekend, but I mean, this was the last hostage prisoner exchange, so to all intents and purposes, it does bring to an end this first phase in what is supposed to be a 3-phase ceasefire deal. As for phase 2, well, that's not going to be implemented immediately. The negotiations for that kind of barely really even started for various reasons. Phase 2 will be very hard to agree. It would make phase 1 almost look, quite straightforward, because phase 2 means 2 key things. Firstly, it would mean the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and an end to the war. And there's many in the Israeli government who don't want that, and they're threatening to collapse the coalition if that happens. And it also mean an end to Hamas's rule in Gaza, and that is probably something that Hamas is not willing to entertain either. So what might happen? Well, I think there's probably 2, maybe 3 scenarios. Firstly is that you can have an extension of phase 1, maybe for an agreed determined amount of time, 3-4 weeks. Some hostages are released, probably dead hostages rather than the living. Hamas would want to hold on to those for now, and some Palestinian prisoners are released. I think that's the most likely outcome. Hamas is also suggesting an all-for-all, end the war, release all the hostages in one go, have all the prisoners back that they want, and the IDF withdraw from Gaza fully and reconstruction continues on the Gaza Strip. I don't think that will happen imminently, if at all. And thirdly, is that it all collapses, the ceasefire collapses, and it's a return to the fighting.
Yeah, Alistair Bunkle there with the latest from Jerusalem. Later this morning, we'll know whether Gatwick Airport will be allowed to expand, allowing it to add an extra 100,000 flights a year if Gatwick is given the green light to bring its emergency runway into regular use. It would have to be moved by 12 metres to bring it in line with international safety standards. You can see there from that graphic. Earlier this week, Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander, who will make the decision, said she's no flight-shaming eco-warrior. Wowza. Also today, dentists have warned that the thousands of extra appointments promised by the government will only cover a third of people who need urgent care. The British Dental Association says 1.5 million people could be left untreated. This is despite the rollout of an additional 700,000 appointments from April. And US actor Michelle Trachtenberg has died at the age of 39. The star, best known for her role as Dawn Summers in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was found dead at her home in New York. This was yesterday morning. Police are not treating her death as suspicious.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we've had an update on the Pope's health this morning. Once again, let's get out to Lisa Holland, who's in Vatican City for us this morning. What is the latest, Lisa?
Just one line from the Vatican this morning that the Pope had slept well and is resting. There should be a further update in the next couple of hours. I think what we safely can say is that after 13 nights in hospital, the Pope is still being treated for pneumonia. He went in on February the 14th with bronchitis, which deteriorated to a respiratory tract infection. And then, of course, he was diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs over 2 weeks ago. I think that what we've been trying to ascertain from the Vatican, they are, of course, a guarded, careful institution, is some sense of how the Pope is doing with regard to that pneumonia. It's been 9 days now since that announcement came that he has pneumonia in both lungs. And, of course, some information 2 days ago that he'd undergone a CT scan routinely, of course, as you would expect. But really very little information as to how he is doing on with regard to the pneumonia. What they have said is that the mild kidney problem persists. This was in an update last night, and he continues to be on high flow oxygen. But as of last night, he was taking visitors yesterday, he was eating, and he can still speak.
Lisa, as always, thanks so much. Now, the UK's largest police force has published a new charter about the use of stop and search. Matthew is here with more on this. Matthew, give us the context and, as we mentioned, the details of this new charter.
Sure. So charter sounds very grand. Essentially what this is, it's the first sort of formal set of commitments to how stop and search will operate going forward that has been made in consultation with London's community, essentially. And it actually grew out of you might remember the controversial Casey review, which was done into the culture and standards of the Metropolitan Police in the aftermath of the murder of Sarah Everard. And it was pretty scathing in many aspects of how the Met ran itself, and it recommended that this charter be created around stop and search. So what the Met says it's done is it's consulted for a year and a half with 8,500 Londoners of different ages, backgrounds, ethnicities, and this charter is the result. So what's in it? Well, first of all, there is a commitment to more training for Met officers around how the use of stop and search. Then there's a commitment to a better and more robust supervisory mechanism. So there'll be, for example, random and regular checks on how it's operating. And then the final thing is, well, there's many things in it, but the final main thing, I think, is a better handling of complaints, which is one of the key problems that had previously been reported with it. And look, fundamentally, the Met thinks stop and search works. So they've got data that they've sent in the press release around this that says that last year alone, it took 3,500 weapons off the streets. But we know it's a very controversial policy. The Met says 68% of Londoners support it, but they do admit that actually that varies radically depending on who you ask. And we certainly know that amongst black and ethnic minority Londoners, it's a very controversial policy, and there is some evidence to suggest that they are disproportionately targeted by it.
Matthew, as always, thanks so much. Now, to a high-risk mission to scout for precious metals and minerals, not deep underground, but up in space. And it's not going to be an easy mission. It'll take 300 days to catch up with an asteroid in question, which is 1 million miles from the Earth. Thomas Moore's been investigating whether the mission will be worth it.
3, 2, 1, mission, and liftoff. Go, Falcon, go into ignition.
Odin thundered into the Florida sky, riding in a SpaceX rocket, heading out into the solar system, the first private spacecraft to venture so far. Its mission is to rendezvous with an asteroid and scout out its potential for mining. Asteroid 2022 OB5 is thought to be rich in platinum and similar metals, widely used in electronics and other critical technology. They're so valuable, the startup Astroforge says it's worth going the distance.
The problem is with Earth is that all of the good ore sources of platinum group metal we've mined. And everything we're looking at now is thousands of meters under the Earth. It's actually very, very difficult to go mine on Earth. We know this exists in space. We know it's readily available. Our mission is just, instead of going down, we want to go up.
Odin should catch up with the asteroid 1 million miles from Earth, then take detailed pictures. If they look promising, another spacecraft will follow, this time landing on the surface to confirm the company has struck platinum.
The little twinkles in there, those are little bits of metal.
At the Natural History Museum in London, there are meteorites that look like lumps of metal. Mining in deep space could make sense.
Metallic asteroids are much rarer than the stony ones, but they are there. They make up quite a substantial part of our meteorite collection here at the Natural History Museum, so we know that they're out there in space, and we know that they're incredibly rich in elements like platinum, but also cobalt and nickel. They're, just a fantastic resource for many metals.
The same SpaceX rocket is also carrying a robotic moonlander called Athena that will drill into the lunar surface looking for water. As the cost of reaching space has plummeted, mining far from Earth has become economically viable, and our celestial neighbours are seen as a potential resource.
Thomas joins me now to discuss this in more detail. And we'll come perhaps to how much this costs, how likely it is to succeed. But I'm fascinated in the law on all of this. So who owns what's up there?
Big question. It could be all of us, it could be none of us, but it's not countries. Under the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, this is something that should be done for the benefit of all mankind. Now, does a company also fall into that same category? Companies have never envisaged going to space. It would always be countries back in the 1960s. But we are at that point where privately built spacecraft can venture out into the void and actually have that ambition of landing on an asteroid and bringing back metals from there.
I mean, presumably bringing back a physical asset that has monetary value, most people would accept that the company that's taken the risk deserves to see the profit of that. I guess the bigger question is the next step. If we started building civilizations on a planet, which obviously I realise isn't imminent, then what laws would govern that? I mean, fascinating.
Well, it's a bit closer to home than planets. Of course, the moon is where a lot of countries are now heading, and they will be building bases there for a semi-permanent habitation by astronauts. So the Artemis Treaty is something that NASA and the US State Department is trying to push through, not with agreement from all countries, notably not China and Russia. And under this, it would basically ensure that each country has a safety zone around its base and it would have the rights to exploit the resources there. It should keep countries far enough away on the moon to allow them to do that without conflict.
And just quickly, I mean, whether it's these rare minerals on the asteroid or water on the moon, I mean, is this something you're expecting is likely to be found and brought back to Earth, or is it highly unlikely still?
Metals will definitely come back. It's going to be worth trillions of dollars in the future. Water on the moon is a different kettle of fish, if you like, because that is actually going to sustain astronauts and exploration further into space. Water to drink, water also to make oxygen and rocket fuel. It is going to change the way we do deep space exploration.
And this is happening. This isn't just pie in the sky.
This is why the other spacecraft on that mission is going to drill into the into the moon's crust at the South Pole, where they believe water is held as ice. They want to prove that, and once they've established a good resource, that's almost certainly where astronauts will land in the years to come.
Amazing stuff. Love it. Thanks so much, Thomas, as always. More time next hour?
Yep.
Great stuff. More questions to come. Right, let's have a quick look at the weather. The forecast is expected to settle over the next few days as high pressure begins to dominate from the south, bringing the risk of overnight frosts and some dense patches of fog. Well, this morning it's a chilly start for central and western parts, but the milder East Anglia area should maintain with heavy blustery showers over Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. That's the weather for you. Well, the Prime Minister, of course, due to meet President Trump later today. What assurances will he be able to secure for the future of Ukraine and many other key agenda items? Let's discuss all of this and more with the opposition. The Shadow Paymaster General Richard Holden is here. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Top of the agenda for the Prime Minister sounds like it's to try and get a US security backing for what happens to come in Ukraine. Would that be top of your agenda as well?
I think at the moment that's the big issue on the international agenda. I think there's quite a few issues actually for the UK government when we're out there. And I think from all sides, I think we all want the Prime Minister to get the best possible deal for the country and wish him well in doing that. I think that's not been helped by, obviously, some of the historic comments made by some of the Labour MPs, including the Foreign Secretary, about President Trump. But I think we can now see perhaps some light
still dwelling
around
on that?
Ukraine. Well, I think it's not me dwelling on it. I think those things have big impacts over time on international relations. I think we've also, seeing some of the comments from the Foreign Secretary yesterday, it did feel to me that they're desperately trying to get the US government to, in a way, bail them out over this issue they've got around Chagos, where they're wanting to surrender British overseas territory and then pay for the privilege, pay UK taxpayers' money for the privilege of doing so. It's quite clear to me that there are, splits and divisions within the government. Otherwise, the Foreign Secretary wouldn't be trying to get somebody else to help him out on an international level too.
Must regret having started the ball rolling on that.
Well, I mean, that's one thing that we obviously started some negotiations there, but when we were heading in the right direction, it was Lord Cameron, when I was in Cabinet and he was Foreign Secretary, who stopped those negotiations going forwards because it was quite clear they weren't in Britain's national interest. Why on earth Lord Hermer, who is there, is the Attorney General, a very close friend of Sir Keir Starmer, has decided to pursue this? A man who's obviously worked on behalf of the Mauritian government, or worked with the Mauritian government in the past, and as well as loads of other people who haven't always been on the UK's side internationally. Why on earth they're doing that, I don't know, and why they've decided to make this a flagship part of what they want to do as in their first time in office. Like who? Like Jerry Adams.
Sorry, you're saying he's worked with the Mauritian government?
No, I'm saying that's who Lord Hermer has been working with, and is working with if you have a look at Lord Hermer's record, you'll see that he is very rarely actually out there batting for Britain, which is exactly, I think, what we want, whether it's our Attorney General or anybody else in the government doing. And it's quite clear when you're seeing the Foreign Secretary making comments like, well, we'll have to see what the US will do, that he's hoping that somebody else is going to bail him out of the decisions that are being made by Sir Keir Starmer.
Clearly, Sir Keir Starmer has timed this trip with a boost in defence spending before going out to the US and done so by funding it out of the aid budget. That's something you support?
Well, if that was definitely going to happen, then that's very much what we support. I think the big question mark, which was raised by Kemi Badenoch in the House of Commons yesterday at PMQs, was where, is all of this money actually going to be going to defence? This Chagos deal, Sir Keir Starmer wasn't clear as to whether actually money which Keir Starmer is saying would be going to defence is actually going to be going to paying the Mauritian government for leasing back our own territory that he wants to give away. I think there's some big questions over this. There's real questions around transparency. Over the Chagos deal more generally, we're just sat there and the actual information we're getting out usually comes via the Mauritius government, via its own parliament. They're not being transparent with the UK people or the UK government, even over the UK public, over the costings even of what they're proposing at the moment. Everything we're getting is via back channels. To me, I think the government really needs to be upfront about these important issues which have a massive impact on the UK.
Government minister this morning saying that at some point it will be, agreed and then debated in Parliament. So I guess the transparency will come then.
Well, I mean, how can we have a negotiation at the moment with one side broadcasting it on the international media, i.e. Mauritius, and the other side we're told to just be good little boys and keep quiet and wait in the dark for what Sir Keir Starmer decides to hand away when it comes to British territory and British interests. I don't think that's where we should be as a country. This is British territory, and we're being told, this is absolutely imperative that we do this. I think we should it shouldn't be the opposition who have to put forwards time in Parliament, like with our Opposition Day debate yesterday. The government should be coming forwards with these issues.
It was the opposition, of course, that started this process, as we've
No, the opposition also, in fairness, we also said we stopped it from going forwards when it was quite clear it wasn't in the national interest. So I can understand that's a line from the government, but it's something that we stopped. We never agreed to this. We would never have agreed to this. Kemi Badenoch's made that clear. Lord Cameron's made that clear. James Cleverly's made that clear.
I don't know that Lord Cameron has made it clear, but...
Well, he has, because he stopped the negotiations.
Well, he...
So he wouldn't agree to it.
As you said, but he hasn't talked about it publicly. But and for you blaming when some people leak from one side to the other, we haven't heard that on the record from him. Just to move things on, we're awaiting a decision this morning on Gatwick. Would you approve the expansion of the Gatwick airport?
Look, I'm not against Gatwick expansion per se at all. I think the big issue here, though, is that we're seeing the government scurrying around for announcements because of what they've done to the economy. I had businesses literally meeting me in Parliament this week from my own constituency saying they are being absolutely destroyed by these national insurance rises, and that's particularly hitting lower-paid workers, part-time workers, those young people just starting out with these massive rises, absolutely hammering employers' ability to take them on. I think all these things can be welcome, but I think this is not going to. These things are now being talked about because the government has absolutely hammered private business in the UK.
But on Gatwick expansion, you support it?
Yes, absolutely. No, but I do. But I think that what we need to
should you have done it earlier?
This is a relatively small thing in the broader context of what we're seeing that this government has done to the country.
If you support it, it's probably something that should have
been
done sooner.
These are quasi-judicial decisions in terms of planning decisions, which the Department of Transport may well have to take at some point down the line. Obviously, things like the COVID pandemic actually meant that some of these airport expansion projects were put on hold, not by the government, but actually by those putting them forwards because we didn't know what would happen regarding air travel. But I go back to my original point, which is that when you're seeing businesses being hammered with an extra £20 billion of taxation a year by this government, when we're starting to see unemployment in some parts of the country rising because of those decisions.
So unemployment data recently was pretty good, actually.
Well,
some
some parts of the country we are seeing real weakness. We're seeing vacancy rates falling very substantially from where they were, and I'm really very concerned about the future.
But we haven't yet. The data on unemployment earlier this month was better than expected. For now, Richard Holden, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we speak to 2 winners of the NHS Awards. We'll be right back. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his 3rd term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over 50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Maitai village on the front line.
Firing to civilians and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free, wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to Sky News Breakfast. We have some sad breaking news to bring you that 2-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the United States. That's according to Santa Fe County Sheriff, coming across in the last few moments, saying also their dog was there and no foul play has been expected.
Of course, we're getting very few details at the moment. An investigation, of course, will follow. But Gene Hackman, many viewers will know, 2-time Oscar winner, also gained fame, of course, for his portrayal of Lex Luthor in Superman. That was in 1978. And then, of course, the sequels too, for Superman 2. So a huge star. This will be a huge shock across Hollywood, no doubt, and a character that was able to captivate millions of fans across the world for his authentic and strong portrayal of each character that he would take on. So, as we say, these details are quite few and far between, but we know that there is a police investigation that will continue.
Let's bring the statement from Santa Fe Sheriff's Office. They've said, we're able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time. But the opening line there confirming their deaths. Of course, as you were mentioning, an extraordinary storied career for Gene Hackman. 2 Academy Awards, 2 BAFTAs, 4 Golden Globes, a Screen Actors Guild Award as well. Hugely decorated, an enduring actor as well, dying aged 95.
I suppose there are a few actors that can maintain such a long career spanning many decades, and we'll be reflecting the life and times of Gene Hackman throughout the show, no doubt. But very sad news to be breaking this morning.
Very sad, and just a reminder to recap it once again, that Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, have been found dead in Santa Fe. Just to bring you the statement one more time from the county sheriff in Santa Fe, we're able to confirm that as fact, but we do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. Exact cause of death has not been determined at this time.
Yeah, of course, we were just saying, weren't we, that his career spanned more than 6 decades, and like you said, Wilfred, 2 Oscars. But he did gain huge fame for his portrayal of Lex Luthor in Superman. Let's hear him talking about that role.
How to make the land more valuable between the time you buy it and the time you sell it. Now, this is California, the richest, most populous state in the Union.
I don't need a geography lesson from you, Luthor.
Oh, yes, of course, you've been there. I do forget you. Get around, don't you? Where was I? California. California, right. The San Andreas Fault. Maybe you've heard of it.
Yes, it's the joining together of 2 landmasses. The fault line is unstable and shifting, which is why you get earthquakes in California from time to time.
Wonderful. Couldn't have said it better myself. Everything west of this line is the richest, most expensive real estate in the world. San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Everything on this side of the line is just hundreds and hundreds of miles of worthless desert land, which just so happens to be owned by Lex Luthor Incorporated. Now, call me foolish, call me irresponsible. It occurs to me that a 500 megaton bomb planted at just the proper point would
destroy most of California. Millions of innocent people would be killed. And the West Coast, as we know it, would
fall into the sea. Bye-bye, California. Hello, new West Coast, my West Coast. Costa del Lex, Lutherville, Marina del Lex, Otisburg. Otisburg?
Where's this monster? She's got her own place, Mr.
Otisburg?
It's a little bitty place.
Otisburg?
Okay, I just wipe it off, that's all. It's a little town.
You're a dreamer, Lex Luthor. A sick, twisted dreamer. Your plan couldn't possibly work.
I'll admit there were a few problems. Adjusting the precise trajectory of the missile, finding the optimum stress point for the fault line itself. Which, by the way, is target 0, right here.
Ooh.
If you are just joining us, the reason we were just watching that extra actors Gene Hackman playing Lex Luthor in Superman is because of the breaking news in the last couple of minutes that the 2-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, the classical pianist Betsy Arakawa, were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the US. And the Santa Fe County Sheriff has confirmed that. They said, we are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this stage. And Leah, the longevity and the range of roles, quite extraordinary, coming back every single decade with another set of huge hits. I remember the Superman films very clearly. I was just looking through this list as well of some amazing films. Some perhaps might not have been the ones that are most critically celebrated, but Crimson Tide, I adore that film with Denzel Washington. Absolute Power with Clint Eastwood, another one. And the other one, again, you can see my taste in films here, it's more the blockbusters, but Enemy of the State as well, a great movie with Will Smith. But again, there's something for everyone there, the Oscar winners as well.
I think his enduring legacy goes back to, if we try to understand him growing up. You know, he was born in 1930. He enlisted in the army at the age of 16. He actually lied about how old he was. So, you know, a true master, even back then, of acting. And then he got his big break, I suppose, before all the big movies, meeting Dustin Hoffman at a local theatre, where he was able to make that first connection. But he's the people's prince, really, because of those different types of genres that he was able to master. He was able to gain such a huge audience, which I think has meant that he's had this lasting legacy.
And he had that sort of very intense presence on screen as well. He kind of really always stood out in the roles that he played, and that very clear voice as well. It always cut through. Born in January 1930, he was aged 94. And was born in California, and of course he and his wife were found in Santa Fe. Actually served in the Marine Corps briefly as well, US Marine Corps, before pursuing a career in acting, and is widely regarded as one of the great Hollywood actors, and you know, summed up by those awards that we mentioned: Best Actor for The French Connection in 1971, Best Supporting Actor in Unforgiven in 1992, 4 Golden Globes and 2 BAFTAs as well. A very impressive set of career accolades there.
And of course, a huge shock just ahead of the Oscars. And in his later years, Gene Hackman kind of shied away, really, from the spotlight, enjoying that quiet life with his wife, who he married in 1991. But as Hollywood wakes up and reacts to this news, it will be such a huge shock. There will be, I'm sure, a police investigation into the circumstances of this, and we will not speculate. But a huge loss, I think, to Hollywood. It's
massive loss, as you said, and as we mentioned, and as Leah just mentioned, the cause of death not confirmed, but big questions, given that, of course, as we mentioned, his wife, the pianist, Miss Arakawa, found as well with him. Let's just recap those headline details. That Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found dead yesterday afternoon in their New Mexico home. The Santa Fe County Sheriff has said, their statement said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." Gene Hackman, aged 94, and the 2-time Oscar winner, enduring actor of titanic proportions, has died. And reading here that he retired from acting in 2004, which is striking to me, because I feel like I've seen him so many times since. I think it just speaks to how those films that he has dominated so successfully keep coming back on. So many great hits from The French Connection, 1971, Unforgiven, 1992, the Superman movies, as we mentioned, in the late 70s and early 80s, Crimson Tide in the mid-1990s.
What an incredible backlog of films.
Extraordinary backlog of films. Matthew's joined us as well around the set to reflect on this extraordinary career that Gene Hackman had.
Yeah, I mean, the one film you didn't mention in that list of, as you say, extraordinary films is the one that my first exposure to him wasn't as a young child to the likes of Unforgiven, but was to the animated classic Ants. I don't know if you remember that from 1998.
Yeah.
I remember that very well as one of the first sort of animated films I watched as a kid, and he played the Ant General Mandible. So that was my first exposure to him. But you're right, it just feels like, you know, almost that list of films, if you had to sort of write a list of iconic films, several of those would be in. From Bonnie and Clyde, I think he came to fame in the end of the 60s, Oscar-winning French Connection, and then, as I say, Unforgiven. I mean, it is quite amazing. And you mentioned the retirement in 2004. He actually became something of almost a recluse. I mean, he really shunned the spotlight. There were some amazing pictures of he and his wife Betsy just last year in Santa Fe. And I was reading it was the first time that the two of them were pictured in public together for over 20 years. So they really did. They just, he gave an interview in 2004. He said, I'm done with acting. And they moved from LA to New Mexico. And it seems like they didn't really look back.
And he really hasn't been in anything since. Because, again, I feel like I've seen him in
so
things.
He's narrated a couple of documentaries, but that's it. He certainly hasn't appeared as an actor in anything. And I think he gave an interview last year in which he was at first interview again he'd done in a long time, and he was asked if he would ever take a role in anything again, and he said something like that he would do it if he could do it from the comfort of his own home. Because I think genuinely, part of the reason, anyway, part of the explanation he gave for leaving acting in 2004 was health reasons. So he'd had heart difficulties and stress. And the interview he gave anyway, he said that he'd basically been advised by doctors not to put his body under the stress that he was doing. I presume, getting into those passionate roles as an actor, it probably does place a bit of stress on the old ticker. So I think it was partially, at least, motivated by health. And I think for that reason, a lot of people sort of thought, nah, this guy is one of the most prolific actors in history. There's no way he'll stay away. And he did. For, over 20 years, quite extraordinary.
And we're seeing pictures there with his wife, Betsy. They married in 1991.
91,
They met at a gym, they fell in love, she became stepmom to his children. And then decided, actually, like you say, we want to have a quiet life. And that feels so removed, doesn't it, from the legacy and the career that he spanned.
And she was a performer as well. She was a classical pianist. So, for the two of them to sort of slip onto the limelight like that was quite interesting. And look, the one thing is he was obviously old in his 90s, but she was 63, which is not enormously old. And look, we have no idea what's happened. We have the statement from the sheriff's office saying that they don't yet know the cause of death, but not suspecting foul play. But it's one of those things you expect a man in his 90s, probably not to have long left in this world. But she was relatively young, I think. So that's quite a shock.
Yeah, a real shock, and adds to the tragedy of this news that has crossed this morning. We're able to bring in now entertainment journalist Caroline Frost. No, not quite yet. Not connected quite yet.
Exactly.
I have to say, going back to the style of acting and his very sort of noticeable, always permanent, intense screen presence, is that voice that I really, you really remember cutting through.
Yeah.
Whatever the role was, I guess he couldn't. I haven't seen Ants, but unsurprisingly, you said he played the general.
He did. He would very much exactly.
So
that, if you had to pick a role, that's the one he would be. Although he did comedy as well. He's been alongside Robin Williams. He had an extraordinary breadth as well as playing the sort of gritty westerns, the action hero,
Royal
Crimson Tide, of course. He also did Get Shorty and a few other sort of much more comedic turns, and he just had an extraordinary breadth. I think at one point in the 70s, he was the most prolific actor in Hollywood. He was hot property. He was doing, I think he did sort of nearly a dozen films in a year in the early 70s. So, he had an extraordinary breadth and ability to turn his hand. And he also did, of course, he was prolific on the stage as well. So a remarkable versatility. And I just, it's one of those, as a sort of child of the 90s, he was one of those faces that I just will always remember, when you sort of start getting into cinema for the very first time. And it just seemed like he was in everything, from Ants on.
And I think that's why he's had such an amazing career. Like you say, Matthew, he goes from comedy, like you say, with huge depth in authenticity in all the roles that he picks. But then for so many people, they will remember Sunday afternoons. It's very quiet, and you have Superman on in the background, and there's Lex Luthor.
Lex Luthor, absolutely.
And it's part of childhood, isn't it, growing up? And that's why it feels such a shocking thing for us all to sit here and announce, because we feel like these idols will last forever.
I have to confess, I'm not as young as I once was, but as they say, but quite often famous actors will die, and I'll sort of think, oh, I vaguely knew who that was, but it wasn't really one of my generation. And Gene Hackman very much was, you know, and that hits home, I think, and you start to see these icons of your own life and childhood start to pass away. Just from a personal point of view, is always a bit more impactful, and he's certainly one of them.
Yeah, Crimson Tide definitely was one that I remember very, very
I
clearly.
rewatched it quite recently, actually.
Yeah, great
really
movie.
good film.
Really good film. And again, all about the dialogue, really, stuck on a...
Well, there's not much else to do.
Yeah, exactly.
They're stuck on a submarine.
But why he kind of fits so well, so well in it. Let's just recap for you the breaking news, if you are just joining us. The news that has crossed in the last few moments that two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the United States. That's according to the Santa Fe County Sheriff. The statement coming from the Santa Fe Police Department says, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." Unexplained circumstances and added tragedy to the news that alongside the 95-year-old Oscar-winning, two-time Oscar-winning actor, 94-year-old Gene Hackman, that his wife, Betsy Arakawa, has passed away as well, as yet unexplained cause of death. And of course, Leah, as you were reflecting on just moments ago, comes just before the Oscars this weekend.
Yeah, and that will, I think, no doubt set the tone for the atmosphere that we'll all see on Sunday going into Monday. But I just think this is remarkable news. This is an icon of Hollywood, and, you know, he first burst onto the scene when he starred in Bonnie and Clyde. What an iconic film!
Every time, just reading the list of films, it's just extraordinary.
I think we're all a bit
things.
shell-shocked.
The other one that I didn't mention, I don't know if you did before I came on, but Mississippi Burning.
Yes.
You know, that's another phenomenal film that he actually was nominated for an Oscar for that, but didn't win it. But, you know, just film after film of just some of the most iconic instances of cinema over the last few generations.
But you know what's then remarkable? When we're all sitting here blown away by his list of movies, then I think it was in 2004 that he said, you know what, this isn't for me. I need to step back. Perhaps health reasons, and that's completely understandable. But then, along with his wife, led quite a reclusive life, which is, I suppose, unheard of in Hollywood.
Because, you know, actors tend to be people who gravitate to the spotlight, not shy away from it. You know, it is interesting, after a lifetime spent in the limelight, he did slip away. I've actually found the quote in a... Actually, this is not the 2004 interview, it's a sort of 2008 interview where he later sort of confirmed exactly what had happened. He said, "The straw that broke the camel's back was actually a stress test I took in New York, and the doctor advised me that my heart wasn't in the kind of shape that I should be putting it under any stress." So it was heart-related.
But it's amazing testament to the quality and enduring quality of the films he made that he hasn't done anything for over 20 years, and yet still feels like a big part of all of the things we're watching still to this day. I'm really amazed that he retired in 2004. Maybe I wasn't aware that he retired at all, but certainly not 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know, but it's one of those things. He feels still current, even though you know he's 20 years ago. But then that's something I sometimes it shocks me when people say that, you know, I was born in 2005 and they're a fully fledged adult.
I think that's really important what you say, Wilfred. You were like, actually, I didn't realise that he had stepped away from the limelight, because he didn't make this huge, big announcement that I'm stepping back. So many Hollywood actors that we see, they do that, don't they? He quietly stepped back, citing, actually, this industry is quite stressful. He was an elderly man. He had a back catalogue that I don't think we'll see again. And
maybe at that point you just think, what more is there for me to achieve, you know? And if it's
point.
putting my body under this stress, like he had nothing left to prove. He'd won everything there was to win. He'd won Academy Awards
for supporting and lead
Palm
actor.
d'Ors, you know, and you
over
think,
80 films. I'm just
80
reading.
films.
Oh, wow.
And that, of course, is on top of various shows on TV and various stage appearances in the theatre as well. Extraordinary accolade. 80 movies, and of course he started in the early 60s, in his 20s, after having been a Marine as well before that briefly, and continued, I guess, into his 70s if he retired 20 or so years ago and dying at the age of 94. Let's just recap that breaking news for you if you're just joining us once again, that the two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in Santa Fe County. The Santa Fe County Sheriff has said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this stage." Gene Hackman was 94. His wife, the classical pianist Arakawa, was 63, and they'd married in 1991. And as we've been discussing, retired to a quiet life together after Hackman retired from acting in 2004.
Yeah, and there's a statement from Reuters. So he spoke in 2008, and although he didn't have a big fanfare goodbye press conference, as it were, he said, "I haven't held a press conference to announce my retirement, but yes, I'm no longer going to act." And I've been told not to say that over the last few years in case some real wonderful parts come up. So even, you know, to the end, he had that twinkle in his eye. He had that humour, which I think just sums him up.
And he
really
did
as a
some
person.
writing in his later days, so he may have not been on screen, but he wrote a couple of historical fiction novels alongside a sort of, don't know if it was a ghostwriter or a co-writer, but Daniel Lenihan, and then he finally, towards the end, he wrote a couple of solo efforts in his last few years. So he obviously still had the artistic drive. It just wasn't a man who was he was done with his time on stage, and or stage and screen. Now whether that was entirely to do with his heart problems or motivation or who knows. But as I say, once you've achieved all that, maybe you've nothing else to prove.
And the heart problems, of course, you're referencing, he'd referred to as one of the reasons why he stepped back from acting in 2004, but we have no indication of a cause of death. Something that is being investigated, though the Santa Fe County Sheriff did say that they did not expect any foul play, as they confirmed the breaking news of this hour, that legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife have been found dead at their Santa Fe home yesterday afternoon. We're going to continue to bring you more on this breaking story on Sky News Breakfast after a short break.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. Breaking news this morning. Hollywood legend Gene Hackman and his wife have been found dead in their home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Leah and Matthew are here to reflect with me on his long career. But first, to bring you up to date on that breaking news from last hour. The 95-year-old two-time Oscar winner, perhaps best known for his role as Lex Luthor in the original Superman films, has died. In a statement on the death, Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office said, "We're able to confirm that they had passed away, excuse me, as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, the cause of death has not yet been determined at this time." Leah and Matthew are with me. And Leah, of course, we don't know the cause of death. We do know the tragic circumstance that he and his wife were both found together, and of course reflecting on his extraordinary career.
Yeah, 2 Oscars, 2 BAFTA awards, 4 Golden Globes, a career that spanned 6 decades. He was born, wasn't he, in 1930, and he enlisted in the army, but this was after lying about his age, serving about 4.5 years. And then he met Dustin Hoffman at a local theatre, and that was the first door opening for him into this incredible career. And I'll just list off a couple of his movies. Of course, for me, personally, his portrayal of Lex Luthor in Superman was incredible and accompanied many Sunday afternoons as a kid growing up. He also, The Enemy of the State, Matthew, my goodness.
Oh, what a film that was.
Incredible film there.
Will Smith.
And it's hard to put into context, really. In later years, he decided that actually the Hollywood fame wasn't for him. He'd achieved everything that he needed to, and in 2004 quietly stepped away from the fame, from the spotlight, saying that, I suppose, he'd done all he needed to do. And I find that testament to character, the type of person that he was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that what's unusual about it is that you know, from such a public life, both he and his wife Betsy, who was a classical pianist, they sort of retreated into relative obscurity. They left LA, they left the bright lights, and they moved to New Mexico. Now, he gave an interview a few years later, 2008, basically confirming his quiet retirement. He hadn't actually done that. But it was interesting that in that interview, he actually cited health. He said that he'd been told, having done a stress test in New York by a doctor, that effectively the doctor, in his words, advised me that my heart wasn't in the kind of shape that I should be putting it under any stress. So a possible health motive, at least partially, in his retirement from the spotlight. But amazing photographs just published last year of him and his wife Betsy out for lunch in Santa Fe in New Mexico. And I was just reading, it was the first time that they'd been spotted together in public for over 20 years. So they really did leave the spotlight behind. I doubt that was purely motivated by health. But I think we should also caveat that with, you know, although he had talked about heart issues and health issues before, we simply don't know if those had anything to do with the sad news that we've just heard. But it is interesting, that was his initial motivation. But the fact that they stayed away for so long, when many people sort of expected that the draw of Hollywood would lure him back in, I think is remarkable.
Remarkable, but also, as I mentioned earlier, surprising that he had retired at all 20 years ago. I hadn't been aware of that, because I feel like his films are always on still, and his roles are always memorable as well, with that very sort of piercing kind of tone he always has with his roles. We're able to bring in now entertainment journalist Caroline Frost. Caroline, reflect on us on the life and legacy of Gene Hackman. What does his career mean to you?
I think what's interesting is that he sums up an era, because he was the best at the time, when films were both intelligent but also big budget. And so the same films that were massive hits at the cinema were also the ones likely to win awards come Oscars season. And so it's much more split these days. So you get these superheroes and you get the interesting theatre-trained actors. But Gene Hackman was one of that era and that breed who completely bridged the two, which is why I think we remember his performances so centrally. You've mentioned all his greatest hits, The French Connection. He wasn't even a big star when he won all those awards for that lead role, but he just absolutely cemented his status as a leading light of the 1970s cinema and just went from strength to strength. And the other word I would probably use is versatility, because as well as being those kind of criminal masterminds with a glint in his eye, exasperated, always the leader of the pack, he then turned those same skills to comedy. And we saw that in Silver Streak with Richard Pryor. We saw that in Young Frankenstein with Gene Wilder. And he was able to share the limelight and be very effective one half of those two double acts. So I think there was just nothing he couldn't do, which is why when we think of his name, all of us have our favourite. Your colleagues mentioned Lex Luthor. Somebody else will no doubt mention French Connection. Somebody else will mention Young Frankenstein. He means something to everybody.
Caroline, what do you make then of the fact that he did quietly decide to step back from the fame, from the fortune of Hollywood?
I think it was an intelligent move. I think obviously age was catching up with him. And again, like many actors of those era, he had a hinterland. He'd come from his Marine training. He was already in his 40s by the time he became a big star. So he didn't have young legs on him. But also, the movie industry around him was changing. We had the globalization of the big franchises, of which he was obviously a massive part of the Superman franchise, but they kind of mushroomed probably because of the success of Superman. And that meant that the scripts were not going to be what he was used to and up to meet his skills. I think everything around him changed. He probably, as you said, had done enough. I mean, he had BAFTAs to his name, Golden Globes to his name, 2 Oscar wins. There's nothing else he needed to prove. Money was probably not an issue. Happily married. What's to go out to work for? So off he went and hopefully lived a very long and happy retirement until this sad news today.
And as we've been mentioning, Caroline, you know, retired 20 plus years ago, so in his early 70s he would have been then. Reflect for us on quite what an achievement it is to have been in 80 films. You know, these aren't quick, small budget films either.
No.
And of course it comes on top of his work on stage and on television too. That is an extraordinary number of films.
Oh, it's proper journeyman effort. Yes, it is. I mean, of course, if you're that successful and you come out of the gates with your first big role, we should mention that there were a couple of near misses. So he was offered the role of the youngster in The Graduate, but Mike Nichols, the director, decided he was too young. I think he was also offered, or was one of the near offers, of the lead actor in The Brady Bunch. So this could be a very different career we're talking about. But instead, he persevered. That French Connection really was the handbrake turn. And from then on, he was just the go-to for those intelligent, script-led, writer-led films of the 70s that many of us still hold dear. And we do take it for granted now in this day and age where we've got these huge franchises. So the cinema world is really split now. Big movie, globalized, globally appealing franchises, or a few independent, much smaller budget, interesting films. And then, but back in the day, you had straight down the middle. You had films like Terms of Endearment. You had all of these kind of weepies. You had ones that were actor and writer-led, and they cleaned up at the box office, things like Kramer versus Kramer, Silkwood, and then they also cleaned up at award season. And Gene Hackman was right at the summit of that era. So I think he got lucky with the era that he worked through and just succeeded so well in, and he was the master of his craft.
And Caroline, it's Matthew here. He didn't completely slide off into obscurity. He kept up something of a writing career. I mean, did that have anything like the impact of his films and his acting genius? Was that translated to books?
No, I mean, nobody was going to turn down an invitation to a reading by Gene Hackman, that was for sure. And we've seen this with many people from that era. Again, I keep harking back to how creative they all were. But when you think of somebody, I don't know, I mean, there are other actors who've gone into arts and crafts, who've become painters. I think Dustin Hoffman paints, Michael Douglas paints, Michael Caine paints. They're theatre trained, they're creative spirits, and just because that they've expended their efforts on the big screen, there is obviously something left in the tank. I don't think there's ever going to be a follow-up career to match anything that they achieved on the big screen. I can't think of anybody who's really done that. I mean, Sharon Stone is now painting. It's obviously a thing that a lot of people do, but I hope it just brought him a lot of pleasure. It meant that he could do whatever he wanted. I mean, there was never going to be anything to match those massive hits of the 1970s and 80s, and I don't think he was going to waste his time trying. And it was a case of satisfying his own very personal and subjective creative urges.
And Caroline, this all comes ahead, doesn't it, of the Oscars?
I mean, Cindy, I was thinking about that because a couple of those films now, I mean, Oscars, it's a good year for Oscars. There's a good spread of films. And when we see actors like Ralph Fiennes and his younger, his contemporary Timothée Chalamet, you know, they're people who are bridging the gap between big budget franchises and successful hits, you know, blockbuster hits for all ages, but also doing interesting stuff. And so we're seeing a few successors to the likes of Gene Hackman. But in terms of that era of film, that era has gone. But who knows, with people like Timothée Chalamet and Ralph Fiennes around, perhaps it will live to see another day. I hope so.
In terms of his personal life, just reflect on that for us, Caroline. Clearly, he's been found with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, and they married in the early 90s and as part of this retirement, have had a quiet life together for some 20 years.
Yes, I mean, anything we say at the moment will just be speculation. I mean, obviously, this is a very sad end. It comes after 30 years of marriage. They married in 1991. Gene Hackman had been married before, but he'd, settled down with his life, a very quiet life with animals, a farm, everything you could possibly want. Colorado mountains, you know, it's the stuff dreams are made of. He used to appear in public occasionally in his local areas, cultural events. It was always a lovely delight when he was spotted. But yes, as you say, happy, quiet retirement with his loved ones next to him. Couldn't ask for more. And it was a very happy story until this sad news that's just come in.
Let's just recap what that sad news is that we've been discussing over the last half an hour in terms of the breaking news a few minutes ago that Gene Hackman, the legendary actor, two-time Oscar winner, and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found dead yesterday afternoon in Santa Fe in their home. A statement from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, the exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." We are, of course, waiting for further information, and they've mentioned in their statement that they are carrying out that investigation and waiting a warrant for full entry to the home. Matthew, we've been reflecting on Gene Hackman's extraordinary career, two-time Oscar winner, multiple Golden Globes, two-time BAFTA winner, with some films that stick in the memory, loud and clear.
I mean, just that list of, you mentioned 80 films. I mean, when you read down it, when you see that list of films in front of you, it is quite extraordinary. I mean, I'm struggling to think of anyone else who could possibly have featured in quite so many iconic films, from Bonnie and Clyde, which launched him, to the Oscar wins in The French Connection, right through the early 90s, The Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood, a special honourable mention for Ants, which, as I say, is one of my earliest memories of film, animated film. It's just an extraordinary list of films, and what a career. But as you rightly say, Wilf, the fact that he retired over 20 years ago, it just doesn't seem believable, because all of those films still feel so current. I mean, I said I was watching Crimson Tide just the other week. So it feels as though Gene Hackman has been certainly a part of my life for the last 20 years, even if he's not been on screen. I just thought one quote that I've just seen in an interview he gave to Reuters, I think was really illuminating in terms of how he saw his life and career after acting. And he left in 2004. He did then have a brief career as a writer. And he said to Reuters that, "I like the loneliness of writing." Wow. Actually. And I think that says something about a man who was very happy to turn his back on the limelight in Hollywood and spend a very quiet 20, hopefully happy years with his wife in New Mexico.
Interesting use of language as well, to say you like the loneliness as opposed to the isolation, or it's a very interesting choice of word, and people often talk about that. There's different emotions that actors have running through them. A recap of that breaking news for you, that the legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead together at their home in Santa Fe. The Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office saying, "We're able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." We're going to continue to keep you up to speed on that breaking news story throughout the morning. We do just want to pivot for a moment and bring you an update on another breaking news story of the morning that we brought you a few hours ago, that the controversial internet personality Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan have left the country and are headed for the United States. Of course, they'd been held in Romania. Let's bring in our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, who's covered their storyline pretty closely over the last couple of years. What is the latest, Siobhan?
Well, we've heard now confirmed from authorities in Romania that the Tate brothers have left the country. We understand this is because there's been a loosening, I guess you'd explain it as, of the terms under which they are being held. So they were charged in 2022 with a variety of allegations, including human trafficking, and they deny all of the charges. And since then, there's been efforts to try and get them into court. Now, that was delayed in December, but they were continuing to be being held in the country, told they couldn't leave the country. And as I said, there seemed to have been some lifting of that to allow them to leave the country. And we are hearing now reports that they are on a plane heading to the US. Now, Andrew and his brother Tristan Tate, of course, huge social media influencers, and they have long had a fan in Donald Trump. They have more than a million followers online, and they are joint UK-US citizens. So it seems that they are heading to the US. And one of the reasons that people are speculating this may have happened is because the foreign minister, the Romanian foreign minister, said that they were approached by a Trump official at the Munich Security Conference, which took place here in Germany, to discuss the case. Now, the foreign minister and authorities in Romania say this decision to allow the brothers to travel is not because of pressure being put on them. This is a decision they claim they've made on their own. But of course, people will be speculating about whether this is the long arm of the US putting pressure on the Romanians. But all we know at the moment is we believe that they're heading to the US. This won't be a permanent stay because the rules under which they're being kept means that they have to continue to check in every month. So they will need to be back. But I think they will be celebrating today because they have long been petitioning that they're allowed out of the country. And it will be interesting to see who they meet in the US. So will they be meeting anyone from the administration? Will they simply be going to see people that they know, family, relatives, and that sort of thing? But, will we suddenly see them popping up with Elon Musk, for example, or even with Donald Trump? We simply do not know. All we do know is that these influencers, still charged, are on a flight at the moment back to the US.
Well, and Siobhan, just on that final point, remind us what they are still charged with and where those charges have come, which country's jurisdiction have they stemmed from?
So at the moment, they're being held in Romania over charges of sex trafficking, money laundering, and allegation of rape, all of which, as I said, they deny. This happened due to their arrests in 2022. The brothers were arrested along with two other women, and all of them have consistently denied the charges. And at the beginning of the trial process, where the prosecutors were trying to get this to trial, the brothers, you'll remember, were held. They weren't allowed out. Then there were various petitions that went on to allow them much looser restrictions. This seems to be the latest in that negotiation, that they are actually now allowed to leave the country. But at the same time, we are seeing other investigations going on by other countries. So we've seen, for example, the UK saying that they were launching investigations as well. Obviously, the Romanians are holding them on their own jurisdiction at the moment. This is because they are still trying to get them to court. They are still trying to work on a court case, although that did suffer a setback in December when the court ruled that the prosecutors needed to look at their case due to errors at that point. But there is still this process going on in Romania, and that's why they're being told to return to Romania to fulfil their bail conditions.
Siobhan, thanks so much for that, Siobhan Robbins. We'll still come on the Breakfast Show after a short break. We'll bring you back up to speed with the breaking news of the last hour that the Oscar winner, legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife have died in their home in Santa Fe. We'll be speaking to film journalist Karen Krzyzanowicz next.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal.
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
Had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing to civilians and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back. Wanted to recap our breaking news this morning that two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the United States. Well, in a statement, the Santa Fe County Sheriff has said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We don't believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." The county sheriff has said they are waiting a full investigation and indeed for a warrant for full entry into the home. But that news has crossed in the last hour or so. And guys, we've been reflecting on the great tragedy as well, not just that this legend of Stage and Screen has gone, but that he's gone alongside his wife and that we don't know the circumstances of that. And Matthew, of course, Hackman in his 90s, Arakawa just 63.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the notable thing, and you're right to preface it with, you know, we simply don't know and we shouldn't speculate, but, you know, a man of 95 you might expect possibly to be, you know, nearing the end, sadly, but, you know, Betsy Arakawa is still relatively young at 63, so look, we must wait further details from the police, but there is time, I think, to reflect on what an extraordinary career the man had. You know, 80 films, going right back to the end of the 60s when he sort of burst onto the scene in Bonnie and Clyde, 2 Academy Awards, BAFTAs, Golden Globes, Screen Actors Guild Awards, Palm's Door, I don't know what the plural of Palm Door. But, you know, extraordinary, literally glittering career, and yet retired 20 years ago. But as you rightly said, Will, it doesn't seem that way at all, because those films are still on all the time. I watched Crimson Tide just the other week, you know, and he still has felt a part of my life, even though he hasn't actually appeared in anything for over 20 years.
Let's just enjoy a clip of one of those films that many of us remember, which was him in the role of Lex Luthor in Superman.
Everything on this side of the line is just hundreds and hundreds of miles of worthless desert land, which just so happens to be owned by
Lex Luthor Incorporated.
Now, call me foolish, call me irresponsible. It occurs to me that a 500 megaton bomb planted at just the proper point would
destroy most of California. Millions of innocent people would be killed. And the West Coast, as we know it, would
fall into the sea. Bye-bye, California. Hello, new West Coast, my West Coast.
Gene Hackman there as Lex Luthor in Superman, one of the many spectacular film roles he played, Leah, that dates back to the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, incredible. And that clip there, playing Lex Luthor, of course, in all the comic books, Lex Luthor was bald.
I was just about to say.
But Gene Hackman refused to wear a bald cap. And so what he suggested instead... Or shave his head, of course. He decided that an ill-fitting wig was much better to imply baldness. So, you know, layering on a backstory for a character, which I think was really key to the legacy of someone like Gene Hackman, from comedy pivoting to, you know, an evil character like Lex Luthor, to so many fantastic films. And then if you dial back to his beginnings, you know, he was this 16-year-old that enlisted in the military, lying about his age so he could be part of the action and serve his country, training as a broadcast journalist. So he was always at the centre of communicating, storytelling with so many people. And I think that's why he's captured decade-long adoration, as Matthew said, a glittering career. That he quietly stepped away from in 2004. He did not have this big press conference and fanfare, but just stepped away, reflecting on a career where he achieved so much. 2 Oscars, 2 BAFTAs, 4 Golden Globes. I mean, it's quite staggering, actually.
It really is. It really is. Let's bring in Karen Krzanovich, the film journalist. Sum up this career for us, Karen. What did Gene Hackman achieve?
Well, Gene Hackman was an actor of renown. He wouldn't take just any role. He turned down a lot of very, very plum roles in big films. Very choosy, but always had a quality, a sense of center that the best actors have. When the real thing that Gene Hackman had, when he was on the screen, you couldn't take your eyes off him. And whatever he played, you completely believed. Whether it was Lex Luthor with his tongue in his cheek, or I mean, he was great at comedy as well as drama. Think about him in Young Frankenstein as the blind shepherd. Just an incredible, incredible actor, and much missed when he retired.
And you mentioned that you couldn't take your eyes off him. You couldn't not listen to him either, could you? I mean, that voice was so intense and brilliant.
He was an extraordinary performer in all ways, vocally, physically. I mean, don't forget he was also on stage and Broadway for quite a while, did summer stock, and he'd been honing his craft for his entire life. after studying, as you mentioned previously, broadcast journalism. He would just seem to have a sense of what a good role was for him, not what the director thought or not what the producer thought, but what he felt he could do best at.
And Karen, you know, 2 Oscars we spoke about. He won the first one, didn't he, for his role in The French Connection, up there as one of his greatest ever films.
Popeye Doyle, that's right, and unforgettable. If you haven't seen The French Connection, go and get it now, because it is a performance that is just lingered. No matter how old it is, it just lingers in the memory, and it affects current films today. People are always referring back to that when they're making films today. They're going, like French Connection, like Gene Hackman.
We also have a clip which we can enjoy, Karen, of him in Unforgiven.
Wonderful.
Enemies, Bob. You've been talking about the Queen again? On Independence Day? I guess you think I'm kicking you, Bob.
That was, of course, The Unforgiven, not The Firm. Karen, I mean, prolific in many, many decades. It's hard really to pin down which of the decades he excelled in most of all.
I mean, that was a wonderful clip. I'm so glad you showed Unforgiven, because it's a great revisionist Western. And I love that he goes, you know, don't talk about the Queen on Independence Day. You know, I mean, it's very clever, and what a great delivery. Yes, I mean, it's difficult to find his best decade. And he was wonderful in the 60s, Bonnie and Clyde. He was terrific in the 70s. Don't forget, he was in the Poseidon Adventure as well, which is a great film to watch at New Year's, and just had a wonderful range. But it shows, if you look at his awards, let's look at the Oscar nominations, Bonnie and Clyde, I Never Sang for My Father, French Connection, Mississippi Burning, and Unforgiven. A huge range of genre, but also very selective. You know, he doesn't have the packed CV of, let's say, Donald Pleasance or any other actor. He was very, very selective, and I think that's why he lingers in our memory for these potent roles.
Matthew here, I'm just going to jump in with a counterintuitive question. He was also in some dreadful films. I'm just looking at some of the scores that some of his films got on Rotten Tomatoes. You know, Loose Cannons gets a 0%. Welcome to Mooseport, his last film, gets 13%. But I suppose the point I'm making is he was in dreadful films, but still managed to shine through as a brilliant character in some of those films. And in some ways, that's a mark of a great actor, right?
Yeah, well, you shouldn't be on Rotten Tomatoes, okay? Get off, see them yourself, is what I say.
Sites are available.
But it's often a film that tanks. Let's say the marketing isn't good, it's released at the wrong time, or it's just not a good film. It's not entertaining. It doesn't do what we want it to do. It doesn't mean that the work isn't great. And if you look at any of the BAFTA winners or the BAFTA nominees even this year, there are films there with that maybe haven't caught the imagination, but have tremendous performances. And I don't think Gene Hackman ever put in a bad performance.
Matthew's showing good balance by bringing up some of the less successful films there. Let's enjoy now a clip from one of the greats. You've already reflected on it for us, but let's have a little clip from French Connection.
All right, Popeye's here. Get your hands on your heads. Get off the bar and get on the wall. Come on, move. Move. Come on, sweetheart, move. Come on, move out. All right, come on. Face the window. Move. Face the wall. Turn around there. Turn around. Move. Come on, move. Hands out of your pocket. Turn around. Turn around. Come on, you heart. Come on. Turn around, big man. Come on, turn around. Get on the wall. Get on the wall. Turn around. Get up. Turn around. Hey, you drop that. Pick it up.
Hold those hands up.
Pick it up. Come on, move.
What are you looking at?
All right, bring it here. Get your hands out of your pockets. What's my name?
Doyle.
What?
Mr. Doyle.
Come here. You pick your feet. You get over there. Get your hands on your head.
Karen, tell our viewers that might not know, what was that film about and why was it so significant, particularly, of course, for Hackman?
Well, it was extremely successful. They actually made a sequel, which back then was unusual. It was about a cop that, well, it's quite a cliche now, but it was about a cop who broke the rules to get things done. Now, we look at that and we think, oh, we've seen that on television series forever. But that was new at the time. That was shocking at the time. And we had all this respect for our institutions. And, you know, Gene Hackman brought that energy. And also, he doesn't look like a tough guy. You know, he's got a receding hairline and, you know, he's got little eyes. And you just think, well, you know, he's not a hero, but he just embodied it. You know, he didn't need the movie star looks. It was his force of personality, his charisma, his ability to give us the energy on the screen that really made us want to watch that film over and over and over again.
Karen, thanks so much for joining us this morning on this breaking news, this sad breaking news. We appreciate your input for us this morning. Just before we move on to another bit of breaking news for you, we just recap for you that headline that the legendary actor, two-time Oscar winner, and his wife, Gene Hackman, have died. The Hollywood legend was found with his wife in their Santa Fe home in New Mexico. A statement from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this point." Of course, more on that throughout the morning. The Santa Fe Sheriff's Office saying they are carrying out a full investigation, but as we said, no foul play is suspected on their part. We'll be back to that story in just a moment, but we do want to bring you now some details on another breaking story where we are waiting to learn this morning whether the government has approved plans to expand Gatwick Airport or not. And our business correspondent Paul Kelso is there for us this morning. Paul, everyone's on tenterhooks about this expansion and indeed the announcement, precisely when we're going to get the announcement and if it'll be definitive or not. What can you tell us?
We are waiting for that announcement from the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. A written ministerial statement is the somewhat analogue way in which the government is choosing to let Gatwick know and those interested parties whether it will get permission to effectively build a new runway here. Gatwick. Its north runway is currently an emergency runway, a relief runway, but they can't use it for either takeoffs or landings currently because under current regulations it is 12 metres too close to the main runway they use here. So they want to move it north by that 12 metres. That is effectively going to involve building a new runway, new taxiways. They want to overhaul the terminal buildings and the like here. There's local opposition. The Transport Secretary gave a speech, Heidi Alexander, earlier this week to the airport's trade body in which she said she was not an anti-flying eco-zealot. That certainly led the industry to believe she will give the all clear to this decision. The Press Association this morning is reporting that she has set out a path for Gatwick to deliver this runway. That appears to be a reference to the terms on which planning permission, if granted, will be made. That will require mitigation to issues around how passengers, the many, many more passengers who use this airport, 40 million a year at the moment, that will increase significantly. How they will get here, what public transport arrangements will be made, what mitigation there might be for noise and impact on the local community. Unlikely, I would imagine, this decision to talk specifically about the issue of emissions and the additional emissions that will come from the extra flights. Of course, yesterday we had the Climate Change Committee, the government's advisors on climate science, talking about the path to net zero and saying that emissions from flights will have to fall by nearly 20%.
Just going to interrupt there because we do have a statement that has just crossed and coming on behalf of the Transport Secretary, as you said, and it outlines, it's quite complicated language, some of this, saying about under which law and examining authority this statement is being issued, and says that the current deadline for a decision is the 27th of February. This statement confirms that today I've issued a minded to approve letter for the Gatwick Airport Northern Runway Development Consent Order under the Planning Act 2008. I'm just scanning through the rest of this statement, saying, I'm issuing a minded to approve decision that provides some additional time to seek views from all parties on the provisions prior to a final decision. And the deadline for the final decision is now extended to the 27th of October, a 9-month extension. The decision to set a new deadline is without prejudice to the decision on whether to give development consent for the above application. So, Paul, I don't know if we were expecting a definitive yes or no, or something of this ilk, which includes a minded to approve letter, but an extension which is being said is without prejudice to the decision to come. Is this a kicking the can down the road, or is this a big step for Gatwick Airport in getting the sort of gist of approval they were looking for?
Yeah, just reading the same statement you've got there, Wolf, and I think the 3 words that Gatwick will seize on and its owners is minded to approve. So the Secretary of State is on side for an expansion. Clearly, if they can meet the conditions, the exact impact of what is a delay of an extension of 9 months we'll have to work through. But one thing that is happening here is that the Planning Inspectorate initially rejected Gatwick's plans, but then for the first time, something the Secretary of State references here, it set up an alternative plan, if you like, for the airport to try and meet, to satisfy its concerns. Now, we'll have to work into exactly what those concerns are and how they've been set out, if there's more detail to accompany this assessment. But this feels like the Planning Inspectorate, certainly with this minded to approve language from the Secretary of State, wanting this to happen, wanting to help the airport deliver this scheme, if it can do it within the areas of concern, particularly, and they will be around noise, they'll be around how people get to here. Gatwick, not particularly well served by public transport, excellent motorway links, but there's a railway in, there's only a north-south connection. One of the big concerns of residents here is how not just passengers, but staff who work for the airlines and on the airport site itself, how they get here. This is West Sussex. The motorway is big, the roads around it are not. So there are lots of issues locally that clearly the airport will have to address. We'll have to establish, when we have a little more detail, perhaps some underlying documents behind this statement, what it means. But for now, the Secretary of State has issued, at the very least, an amber light, I would say here. She is minded to approve this planning permission, but the final decision clearly moved back to the 27th of October 2025. So that gives the airport, and of course those who don't want it to happen, time to respond. But for now, at least I think we had that announcement by the Chancellor a couple of weeks ago, Labour's commitment to growth, seeing Heathrow, a third runway there, as clearly as part of that growth mission, as she would put it. We've got Heathrow working on putting together plans for their third runway, a massive scheme, much larger than the construction project that would be in mind here. Now we have the second biggest airport in the UK, the largest single runway airport in Europe at Gatwick, getting certainly encouragement to continue with its plans for expansion. So after years of stasis in aviation, to the frustration of the industry and to many who believe the British economy needs growing airports to continue forward momentum, we have two big signals from government in a very short space of time for the two biggest airports to get bigger. Of course, none of these decisions are easy, but these are decisions that do not involve public money, and it'll be a £2 billion project here at Gatwick. It's private money, it's private investment. So if the view certainly from government appears to be now, if they can get out of the way to let that private money be spent while satisfying local and other objections, that's good news for the economy.
Paul Kelso, thanks so much for that. Let's get some reaction from Celeste Hicks, Policy Manager at the Aviation Environment Federation. Thanks so much for joining us, Celeste. Your reaction, first of all, to this statement. Were we expecting something definitive, or was this largely what you're expecting, a kind of half green light, but with a timeline to still appeal?
No, I mean, I'm quite surprised, actually. We were sort of expecting a definitive decision because the parliamentary calendar with regards to how the development consent orders are laid out in law meant that today was the deadline. So, yeah, this is quite unexpected for me.
So were you expecting it to be rejected or approved? Is this...
I mean, the mood music recently gave us a strong indication that we were expecting it to be approved. So I'm kind of encouraged by this because I was just reflecting, listening to the discussion about the Climate Change Committee report yesterday. This would have been quite horrible timing if yesterday the committee had said that aviation demand needs to be constrained, and then the very next day the government comes out seemingly in defiance of that advice and then advises that the second biggest airport in the country can expand. So, you know, I was not aware that they had this option to kind of have a middle ground. So that's really interesting for me.
And so clearly you're seemingly against this expansion. It's funny you mentioned there that aviation demand needs to be curtailed. Clearly there is assessments from across government of multiple years that supply needs to increase just based on where demand is at the moment, and that's important for the economy. Of the options out there, is Gatwick the most sensible, given that there is an existing runway that can be tapped that's not being used?
So at the Aviation Environment Federation, where I work, we tend not to take choices over which airport is approved over any other one because we represent members, and we have members at almost all the airports in the UK. And the issues for local communities in all of those airport communities are the same. It's noise, it's air pollution, it's traffic congestion. I mean, from what your correspondent was saying, yes, Gatwick is a simpler plan. It doesn't involve the same amount of huge infrastructure project that the Heathrow plan would need. The Heathrow plan would need the M25 to have a tunnel built underneath it and a runway built over the M25. So obviously, as you were saying, Gatwick doesn't require that. So it is an easier option. But yes, I mean, broadly, we're against any airport expansion on the grounds that it can cause awful problems for noise and air pollution for local communities, and also, as we've been talking about, the climate impacts.
Are there things that could be done with this expansion that would lessen your concerns? Or have we not got to that stage of the detail on it? Is that what's...
I'd be really keen to see what this decision, what's in this minded to approve letter in terms of what the extra details are. I mean, I imagine that some of what's been discussed behind the scenes will be about sustainable aviation fuel and the role that will play in reducing emissions. So if you go back to the Heathrow decision or the Heathrow announcement by Rachel Reeves, she was heavily relying on what we call sustainable aviation fuel as the solution to aviation. There are a lot of problems with sustainable aviation fuel. It's not a guaranteed emissions reduction, and it's also more expensive. So I think that some of what's going on is possibly trying to remodel the impact of sustainable aviation fuel on Gatwick's plans. Going back to yesterday, what the Climate Change Committee said, they were estimating that sustainable aviation fuel will only make up about 17% of fuel in 2040. And I know that the Gatwick plans were estimating 26%. So there's quite a difference there between what Gatwick was saying would be supplied by sustainable aviation fuel by 2040 compared to what the climate change advisors have just said to the government yesterday.
Celeste Hicks, thanks for joining us on that breaking news that there's been a minded to approve letter from the Transport Secretary towards a Gatwick airport expansion, but the final decision delayed for 9 months. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll return to the breaking news story of the day that Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife have died in their home in Santa Fe. We'll speak to film critic Eamon Warman next.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Maitai village on the front line.
Firing to civilians and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free, wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
1,500 movies. I don't want this flight to end. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back. To recap our breaking news this morning, the two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the United States. In a statement, the Santa Fe County Sheriff said, "We're able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." We're able to bring in film critic Amon Warman to join us now. Amon, break down for us just how much of a giant of Hollywood, of acting, Gene Hackman was.
He was a phenomenal actor. You know, I think most actors dream of just being in one masterpiece. It can be easily argued that Gene Hackman starred in 4. The French Connection, The Conversation, Unforgiven, The Royal Tenenbaums. I would actually personally throw in Crimson Tide as another classic film that I absolutely love. And he was brilliant in all of them and more. He starred in over 80 films across 4 decades. He won 2 Oscars, as you say. He also won 2 BAFTAs and was nominated 5 times. Just an excellent, versatile actor, and he's going to be missed.
Yeah, Amon, it's Leah here in the studio. This is going to be a colossal loss, isn't it, for cinema? I would dare to say the finest screen actor ever. Would you agree?
He'd certainly be in that conversation. As I say, his list of credits is just incredible. Very, very good at playing authority figures with gravitas, who had a little bit of menace to them, but also very good at bringing the warmth and the humor as well. One of his most famous roles was, of course, in Superman as Lex Luthor. As there's a lot of humor to that role that he was able to bring. And that versatility, which he showed in that film and many others, runs throughout his entire career, both on theatre and in film. It's a colossal loss. And you are right, any conversation about the greatest screen actors of all time should include him.
Amon's Matthew here. Versatility is exactly the word that I was going to use. And one of the things that we haven't even discussed as much this morning in the studio is he was also at the vanguard of a few things. I'm thinking of The Birdcage, which was one of the first films from a major studio to feature an LGBT couple as its main centerpiece. And he actually dressed up in drag for that film.
That's right. He did dress up in drag for that film. And it's a sign of his ability to be ahead of the times in that regard. Like, we've obviously come a long way in terms of LGBT representation on screen. It wasn't always that way. And so to be in a position to make that decision to say, yes, I'm going to do that. I'm going to portray this in as honest and authentic a way as I possibly can. Just goes to show you his character as well as his acting ability.
Do you have a favourite movie of his?
Oh, Crimson Tide, as I say, would probably be my favourite. Denzel Washington is my personal favourite actor of all time, and watching two all-time greats go at it is just sensational cinema. In that film, Gene Hackman plays Captain Frank Ramsey, and there's a debate over what to do between him and Denzel Washington that basically powers the entire movie. There's one scene where they go into a shouting match for basically a couple of minutes, and it's just riveting cinema. So Crimson Tide will probably be my favorite. I mentioned Unforgiven, which is, in my opinion, Clint Eastwood's best film as a director. He is so fantastic in that. Again, acting opposite equal greats like Morgan Freeman, doing a great job. Enemy of the State, I don't think it will be in like the top Gene Hackman sort of films list, but it's a film that I personally enjoy rewatching. In that film, he's going opposite Will Smith. Again, directed by Tony Scott, who also directed Crimson Tide. That's another one of my favorites personally. But you could go down the list and you could ask many a cinephile what their favorite Gene Hackman movie is, and you'll get 20 equally valid answers because his filmography is just that good.
Well, we had similar tastes, Aman, because I would have gone for Crimson Tide as well.
Hey,
a couple of minutes left. What were you going for, Leah?
Definitely Lex Luthor Superman. It propelled him to fame, and he refused to wear a bald cap.
Matthew?
Look, so as not to copy you and Amon, I'm going to go something slightly. I think Ants. I think that battle with the termites at the beginning of Ants is up there with Saving Private Ryan as best opening battle scenes of all time.
Amon, thank you for joining us. We do appreciate it. And we do leave on that breaking news today that Gene Hackman and his wife have died at their home in Santa Fe. Much more coverage of this rolling throughout the day on Sky News. Gareth Barlow's up next after this short break.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.